Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Engaging the Phenomenon. And this is Crash Retrieval Week. We're towards the end of it over here, but we're joined by an awesome panel. We got Grant Cameron, Richard Dolan, and Melinda Leslie. Welcome, guys.
Well, thank you.
Great to be
Welcome,
here.
thank you.
At my age, I'm glad to be anywhere.
Right. Yeah.
You and me both. You and me both.
I kind of
Yeah,
feel
you
that
too.
way, too, even though I'm a little younger,
Yeah.
just because it's 2022, you never know. So, I really appreciate you guys coming on here. And, one topic I did want to touch on here, of course, and we got some experts here on the issue is the ATP, and our friend Omega, just with his friend or our colleague, the Hermetic Penetrator, just wrote an amazing article. It's like a book, really. It should be a book called Loose Threads, and it's touching on a lot of UFO secret programs, but the people that have been trying to penetrate them over the last several decades. So in regards to that, I guess, Richard, we can start with you because you actually interviewed Omega on your channel, which was, it was an absolutely excellent overview. So what are some of your thoughts reflecting on that now?
I was really impressed by him. And, I said it on my program, but I'll just say it here. You, James, were the guy who connected us. So, I'm very grateful to you for that. It was very gracious for you to ask me to interview this gentleman. And it really was a very good interview. So what he and his colleague did, basically, they did their own kind of research deep dive into a number of documents that a lot of us have been talking about. So obviously the Wilson Davis notes, they did a close look at that. A lot of other people have done that, but they did their own. They looked at some of the notes of the guys who attended the Advanced Theoretical Physics Working Group meeting. So Jack Houck, Melinda knows all about those notes, of course, and Oak Shannon, Grant, and we've all discussed all of these notes. They've been out recently. So those were examined, and then they did a couple of analyses of some of the FOIA documents, one in particular on John Greenwald's Black Vault. And then what they did a lot of was just analyzing recent or even sometimes old interviews, people like Jacques Vallée, Eric Davis, the usual suspects, that whole group. And what they ended up doing, I feel, was they did more than just validate Davis-Wilson notes. That's been done. We all kind of know those are the real deal. But I think one of the main things they did that was fascinating was to look at the importance of John Alexander's ATP, the Advanced Theoretical Physics Working Group, starting 1985. And a couple of things. So one, their basic thing was like everything or a lot that came out of those meetings is with us to this day. They actually argued without that group, you probably don't get NIDS, you probably don't get ATIP, you probably don't get to the Stars Academy. You can argue one way or the other, but that's actually what they suggested. And then the other thing that struck me as just off the top really interesting was the importance that remote viewing as a tool was for a lot of these people to try to get into the UFO mystery. You're talking about, super brilliant, well plugged in guys with security clearances galore. They're all interested in UFOs, and they're asking, how do we find out about this? Well, remote viewing is a tool. And so they pointed out, Puthoff talked about remote viewing as a tool in those 1985 meetings. And so that was interesting. And there's more, I'm sure it'll come out as we get into this discussion. But I think they did a really good job in making a historical case for the importance of what happened in the 80s, for the importance of remote viewing. God, there's more, and it'll come to me as we're talking. But yeah, it was very well done, and I know that that gentleman, Omega Point, was recently interviewed by Jimmy Church, and he may have done some other shows at this point as well.
Well, it's probably worth my jumping in super quick just to say last night, he and I, Omega and I, had a nice long phone conversation. It wasn't necessarily intended. He had texted me about something and I replied, and then I realized to really answer him, it was going to be a longer conversation. I said, do you have time right now? He said, yeah. Well, we ended up talking for, at least an hour, maybe two. It was really great. And, of course, what they did with their paper is stupendous. Absolutely. And their research, of course, I told him that. But what's kind of a little interesting is he's got into the stuff that they were afraid to put in there, the stuff that was kind of pushing the envelope too far. So I think there'll be a second follow-up. I'm going to greatly encourage them to go into those areas and do a follow-up, and anything I can do to help them and give them information, I will.
More
Yeah, for sure.
secrets, Melinda, more secrets. What the hell's going on? First, you got a special guest tonight. Now you're gonna go through this.
Wait, who's what special guest? I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
No,
We're not going to
Before
talk
we
about that,
start.
guys. But yeah, again,
all I'll say, since that just got mentioned, we are recording, that I am taking someone on my tour. That's tonight. But that's it. So I can't say anymore until I have his permission to do so.
you can give us
But
some
an
initials.
important, powerful person.
Initials.
Yes.
Important.
Yes.
Any.
No.
Organization.
I
Okay.
can't, you guys.
I
I'm
know.
I'm not going
I
to
know.
blow it.
for people listening too, the loose threads I'm going to have linked in the description so everybody can read it and must read it and has to read it, because if you haven't read that, you're probably not up to speed on in the contextualization of where we are today and why and how. So I can't emphasize enough that people need to read this incredible work by Omega Point and the Hermetic Penetrator.
That's right.
So Melinda,
Yes.
you were kind of right in the middle of that whole storm as it was brewing, actually, with Jack Houck and some of those people. So, from your perspective back then, I mean, had you foreseen it coming to this point where it is today from when you were back?
No, absolutely not. I mean, back when oh gosh, it's such a long story. It all started, first I've been in the research field for 34 years now, going on 34 years. But it was at some point, I think, mid 90s. I'd have to really think about that to get the absolute date. I do have it somewhere in some notes and can look that up. But I went to a MUFON Los Angeles meeting, and the speaker was Ed Dames, speaking about remote viewing. And at the end of the presentation, now what Ed didn't know at the time is I was taking a remote viewing class, if you will, from Jack Houck, and had known him for years, had met him through his PK parties, his psychokinesis spoon bending parties, which I now also teach. But that's originally how I met him. And I knew a little bit about his background with McDonnell Douglas, and I knew he was Bob Wood's boss at McDonnell Douglas. And, so there are certain things that I knew. But so I go to this talk by Ed. I stand up at the mic at the end and say something about Jack Houck's way of teaching versus Ed's teaching. What Jack was kind of doing was back what they originally developed at SRI, with sending like outbounders out and stuff like that. Not so much the official military profiles. And then of course Ed Dames went on to do SciTech and do his own version, kind of building on it in a different way. And so when he was talking about that, I asked about Jack's techniques, and he goes, oh, Jack's is completely different, blah, blah, blah. And that was that. So it was just a quick question at the mic thing. And then at the end of the talk, I hang out back in the room because I knew a bunch of the, people involved with MUFON LA. And I go to leave. Well, there's this narrow entrance to the parking lot from where they used to have their things. And Ed is standing there with a group of people. Now he'd been all done and left like what I thought was like a half hour earlier. And yet he's standing there, holding court with a group of people. And he says to me, as I go through the gate, I'm just saying, excuse me to go by. I have friends actually waiting for me at Denny's, and he stops me and he goes, so Jack Houck? Well, you guys, that was the beginning of a journey that takes me to being here right now. I mean, the stuff he told me then blew my mind. It was like saying Jack was a member of MJ12. I mean, that's how it came across. He mentioned other members. I think at the time I thought, why is Ed telling me this? And after he does all this, he then says, are you going to see Jack soon? How often do you talk to him? And I said, yeah, I don't talk to him that often. I might see him. Well, I wasn't about to admit to Ed that I knew the very next day I had another class with Jack. He was teaching them in Anaheim at a center. So I went the next day and confronted Jack about what everything had told me about the group, and Jack went ballistic. Anyway, so this is it's a huge involved story, and it's the shortest version I've ever given, but Jack just went ballistic. I ended up then approaching Bob Wood about his involvement, and eventually John Alexander and Hal Puthoff. And actually I had 3 different people approach Hal on my behalf, and they were all people who worked with him. 2 of them were working on projects on and off with Hal in Austin, Texas. And they approached him, and, and they said Hal's response was like, oh my God, like, how does anyone know about this? And that's what started my looking into it. And I worked for years with my research associate, Randy Kopang, on this. And if these guys sneezed, I was going to say another bodily thing. You guys get the idea. We were writing it down. I mean, and Randy kept this incredible timeline, but that it's come to this, and then Jack, after he passed away, my friend Steve Paldoros, and a researcher friend in Southern California, got to know Jack's family even better than I did. And when Jack passed away, his wife said, he's got some files at home, Steve, would you be interested in these? And let him come over and go through them. And he removed like 2 file boxes, but he took him a couple days to go through them, and he came across what we're talking about here, the Jack Houck notes. And Steve calls me and he says, you might be interested in this. He proceeded to immediately fax them to me back then. And anyway, so, and then eventually sent me a 1st generation copy. So that became the beginning of my having those notes from Jack. And they were the notes, the outline, they were the kind of not so much the minutes, they were the agenda sheet and all the overhead. Back then, in 85, when the meeting happened, there was no PowerPoint. So they were using overhead projector, transparencies, and the copies of all those transparencies. And I think a bunch of stuff written in pencil that were spreadsheets and stuff done by Jack that had probably been made into, like, copied into transparencies and used in the presentation. And those were in there. And so there we go. So that's how I got, my set and everything. But going back to what you just asked, I mean, that we're here now is just blows my mind.
May I just want to jump in. I know Grant's got something to say, but if I'm not mistaken, so the whole thing about these notes, people listening, they may not all be on board with what we're talking about.
Sure, of course.
So the ATP meetings, the Advanced Theoretical Physics Group meetings, these are organized by John Alexander and Ron Blackburn back in the mid 80s. And the idea was these, they brought in Hal Puthoff, they brought in Bob Wood, they brought in Jack Houck, other people. The idea to, as Alexander's put it many times, I guess, to kind of create their own UFO group with a lot of knowledge and a lot of like their own center of gravity, so that the real UFO group would find them and bring them in. And
Yes.
Alexander always said, oh, there wasn't any such group. I've had other people in that group say, that's a load of bull. There was another group. But anyway, be that as it may. So what you got, Melinda, if I'm not mistaken, I think you got the first example of actual notes what this group ever talked about.
Yes,
Like,
that's right.
there has been discussions, but maybe kind of in, vague terms, but you actually got access to genuine notes. So that was very important.
Yeah,
And,
official, documents, if you will, from
Exactly.
the meeting. This is what they used. These were probably handouts at the meeting,
Yeah.
and then it was years later, and we can go to Grant after this, that Grant ended up showing me and publishing the agenda page from those notes, which matched mine. So I knew that he had the same thing, because that typed out agenda sheet was exactly what I had. And mine have our handwritten notes by Jack. So the what I have that Grant doesn't have in the Shannon notes is additional handwritten notes by Jack. And of course, Grant, besides the original agenda typed out, the rest is all handwritten notes, but I'll let Grant tell you about that. So, but it for me, you guys, it's been a 30-year history of the working group research project, and I've done presentations on it for conferences and whatnot, and interviews on it. I mean, you know, I was very flattered that Hermetic and Omega were both following my work quite a bit and had seen my presentation stuff. So thank you guys out there, you know, thank you. And of course I told Omega, he knows we're doing this today. He may be listening, at least I certainly hope so.
Yeah, and Melinda, please, when we're done, send me a link, and I'm going to put those in the description, because those are absolutely meticulous and excellent presentations on the working group. I mean, and the graphs that you have there and the outlines are incredible. I mean, yeah, I mean, it's got to be like,
and I think it's important here for me to emphasize what my interest always was. And Omega and I talked about this quite a bit last night on the phone. These guys meaning the working group and all the various members and supporting members, if you will, Science Advisory Board, we're very, very interested in abductees. And all along I did the MILAB covert, MILAB, MIL for military, AB for abduction, covert human involvement in the abduction phenomenon, and the fact that abductees were targeted and harassed and picked up and interrogated, etc. Well, I kept coming across these guys over the years and realized that there was a connection. So going back to what was clear in Jack's notes all those years to me, and I was quick to say this in presentations, is they had three predominant areas of interest in the working group. One, of course, was the technology. That's a given. One, as Richard just pointed out, was the remote viewing or the whole side component. And the third, equally important, or maybe you could put the remote viewing side part under this as a subset of this, and you could say there are two focuses when you look at all the meeting minutes, mine and or I should say Jack's and the Shannon notes, Halke and Shannon, is realizing that they had such an interest in abductees, and still do to this day, where they're doing blood work and caudate putamen and everything, with abductees. So you go, they never stopped.
Well, and just, I don't want to interrupt you, but just really quickly, I want to emphasize the importance of the article that Billy Cox just did.
Yes.
With, in the article, it's Tom DeLonge and Lou Elizondo and McCaslin. And, we got this from Terry Lovelace,
That's right.
and Billy Cox's amazing work, because this is such an important part. I don't think
one day he'll actually admit that Davis Wilson notes are legit.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and again, here is, Terry Lovelace gets a call, and it's Tom DeLonge, and he says, I'm here with Elizondo and General McCaslin. So putting them together in a room, talking about experiencers, and they want to know about the thing in his leg, right? Yes, so an implant is an incredible, I mean, it's not as if we hadn't assumed this before, but this is on the record. And we have them in the same location working together with an interest in experiencers and implants. So obviously that's right up the alley of abductions, as well as if we know Terry Lovelace's story. So I just want to add to that for context and importance in the
James
relevancy.
I'm friends with Terry, and I knew he had some MILAB involvement. We talked about it. I didn't know that had happened, that they'd approached him, but I'm not surprised, because I know over a 20-year period of these guys interfacing, at least 20-year period, but I can say that where I knew that these guys were interfacing with abduction cases that I knew, or, a lot of them are actually friends of mine. And I was hearing stuff firsthand from them about what they were going through with these guys and their interest in them. And it just so happens that all these abductees that they were showing interest in were also my lab cases of mine.
And exactly. And what I wanted to add to that, Melinda, is that, Terry here has the black helicopters.
That's right.
And
exactly.
I have the old school MILABs book, which is,
right.
it's a short, small, but it's classic. I think everybody should
Helmut Lammer.
Helmut Marion Lammer's book. Yeah.
And again, it's
I have a chapter in there.
Yes. And I didn't even know that was you when I read it. I read this years and years ago when you could still get a copy of it. And
Yeah.
that was before I had actually heard of you.
That's where I officially get to feel like I've been in this field. Richard, well, Grant, both you guys can relate. I've been in too long.
Yeah. So
34
again,
years.
that's all incredible. And if anybody ever speaks to Tom, they need to ask him about MILABs, because
Yes.
I made a whole video talking about there's a high controversy with Dr. Stephen Greer. So Stephen Greer is talking about MILABs. And people are like, oh, well, that's nuts. And, maybe some of the other stuff he's got is good. But then you have Tom DeLonge years later, with different insider military sources saying the same thing. And it's recorded on a video. And again, I have it I made a video discussing it, because why do we have Tom DeLonge, with these advisors talking about MILABs publicly? I think he may have been told not to talk about that anymore, because it's such a controversial topic. And again, for people listening, like Melinda said, MILABs is military abductions, and a very interesting note to speak to that is Jacques Vallée's Journal 4. Jacques and I just interviewed him and asked him about this. Is that Vallée, in his book, and then he's talking about in the 1990s, he secured a document that is confirming that the CIA had hoaxed abductions in South America and Argentina and Brazil. So, and that document exists, and he said it exists. And I think, a few of us know where that document is, and the people will eventually get to see it. But, I can tell right now, like, Grant is raring to go. He's, so Grant, let it rip.
Yeah, I don't. You said so much stuff already. On this last point, I guess without, and I'll cut off Melinda so I can finish. But Jim Semivan, she had a long discussion with Jim Semivan about the MILAB or MILAB, however you want to pronounce it, and he maintained there was no way that this would be going on with the amount of money they would need and stuff. But Melinda can talk to that. One of the things you had brought up that with in regards to the notes, or why they're dealing with experiences, I've always said that's what they have to do. We've got to forget the UFO sightings. We've got to deal with the experiencers, and they've always sort of done this. The first notion I got was from Pandolfi, was this expression which said, because we cannot control the phenomena, we watch those that the phenomena influences. That's all they can do. And the second confirmation of that is Chris Bledsoe. When I was talking to him, he actually confronted them at one point, and he said, so why are you guys here? Like, why are you on my property? Because they wanted to set up all these monitoring devices and stuff like that. And why are you guys all here? And then he was told, well, it appears that you have a contact with them. They seem to like you. They don't have any contact with us. They don't seem to like us. So we're here to see what's going on at your property. And there was a number of things that I asked. For example, you brought up Tom DeLonge. Well, Tom DeLonge tried to option Chris Bledsoe's movie, and then he wanted to put reptilians in at the end, and Chris said, get lost. And Chris told me how much money was involved. It was an absolutely stunning amount of money that was involved. And Chris said to me, he says, now there's something that I had to, that you have to think about in order to turn down. And it confirmed the fact that Chris was never in this for money. I know the one time I met with him, when we were with Tim Taylor, he was being offered, I believe, $1.5 million just to sign the contract, 2% of gross and 4% of royalties. And there was all these big businessmen around him advising him, what to sign and what to do, what not to do. And when I asked him numerous times, I'd ask him, were they interested in this? Were they interested in that? Because that's always been my interest. I'm not really interested in whose club or whatever, but I always realized right from the word go that I didn't know what was going on, but I knew damn well that guys like Kit Green and Hal Puthoff and Eric Davis and these people knew what was going on. And I said, no matter whether you believe these people or don't believe them or hate them or whatever, listen very carefully. These people know some stuff that you don't know. And from time to time, something will slip through the cracks. So I asked him, for example, at one point, I just finished the book, Alien Sky Pilots, where I talk about the 36 plus people who claim they've flown the craft. So I said to Chris, he told me, and I was shocked when he told me he'd flown the craft. I said, you flew the craft? So I interviewed him, and I said, shut up, I just want to interview you from start to finish. He told me the same story everybody else told me. And then I said, at one point, I said, hey, you had all these big high level guys around your property. Did they ever ask you how to fly the craft? And he said, Oh yeah, he said they brought me to a general. They brought a general, U.S. Air Force general to me, and I explained to him how you fly the craft. So that's the idea was that it makes sense that they would be following experiencers because experiencers have these various patterns and they're looking for metals, they're looking for what's actually going on. And you don't learn that much from sightings. I mean, sightings are very interesting. You make a lot of money by setting up AI programs to investigate and stuff like that. But in terms of what it tells you something's going on that probably isn't our stuff. But it's not until you talk to the people who are behind the intelligence or talking to the intelligence that you're going to learn what's actually going on. And that's why it's so important whether you believe these people or believe it's anecdotal or they may be making up stuff. It's still a vast quantity of material, and you start to see these very definite patterns that you see there, the same as you see patterns in orbs, you see patterns in channeling, but you've got to look at an awful lot of material in order to see the patterns.
And Grant, you know, again, for people listening and watching this, definitely check out Grant's book, The Contact Modalities, because it gets into a lot of that stuff in depth, and it's really excellent work.
And his new book,
UFO Sky Pilots.
UFO Sky Pilots. I was about to ask him the name of it
Yeah.
again.
And
UFO Sky Pilots.
And I want to add to that, you know, some people may have not connected the dots, but if you're doing what people call CE5 or HEIS, what in a aspect, partially what you're doing by vectoring, if you go by Stephen Greer's method, is one such method is doing a remote view and non-locally or remotely influencing where the craft operates. So there's a connection between CE5 remote viewing and what people call flying the craft and simulations. Absolutely. And simulated consciousness and things like that. So I just want people to be aware of those connections, because
can I make just one contact on the notes? I'll just make it very quick to give my background over the notes, because I've told it once or twice, but a lot of people may not have heard it, how I got the notes. And that was that in the early days,
Grant, just to clarify, which notes are you talking about? So
these are the Shannon notes that have just been released along with the Houck notes, which fit into the Wilson leak documents. So back in the day, I always knew that I knew about NIDS through Eric Davis. And the whole concept was that Bigelow had the money. So he brought in the highest level people that he could, and he paid these guys, I can't remember, it was $3,000 a day or whatever, and then and he'd bring them in 6 times a year. And what he was doing is basically picking their brain to find out what's going on. And that's what I did. I would follow these guys around and listen to what they say and read everything they did to see what they would say. So he was bringing them in, and what happened was they went from 6 meetings a year down to 4, down to 3. And then they laid off Eric Davis, and that's where I got the notes. So Eric Davis gets laid off, and that's when I talked to him. And the NIDS people were talking to me basically through Hal Puthoff and through Eric Davis, and basically wanted to know, because my expertise was the Canadian government, so they wanted to know what metals had Wilbur Smith handled. Did I have access to the materials, the paperwork for that? And did they work on, Wilbur Smith worked on this gravity control experiment, and they wanted, what did I know about the experiment? Was there papers and stuff? Because they're trying to sort of vacuum up all the material around and try to figure out this stuff. And the other thing they wanted to know about was the Holloman Air Force Base film. And they were actually going to bring in Shardle, who was the security manager, the guy who claimed he'd actually seen the film. So NIDS was going to bring this guy in to interview him, and he died in a rollover car accident 2 weeks before they were going to interview him. So they were doing this kind of stuff, and they wanted to know, and they knew that I was good friends with Bob Emenegger. So it was like, what did Bob tell you about the film? What was the story he told you about the film? And they were trying to find out, where's the Holloman Air Force Base film? Who's got this film? So that's how I had the contact. So I was in Las Vegas, and I was meeting with Eric Davis, and what had happened is they'd gone down to, I think, 3 meetings a year, 2 meetings a year, whatever. And then he was basically shutting it down. And Eric Davis was the first guy they canned. So Eric Davis was the head scientist for NIDS, and they laid him off. And that's when I met him. And he was absolutely furious. He was just like, he had no job. He had these 2 kids, and suddenly he's unemployed, and he had nothing good to say about Bigelow. And he was talking to me a mile a minute, and he was telling me what was going on and how it all worked and stuff like that. And then he gave me the notes, and I'm not 100% sure, but I think part of the reason for the notes was to burn John Alexander. I don't think that Eric and John really saw face to face on all issues, and I think that was one of the reasons. And as Oak Shannon, who's actually been interviewed now, talks about it, that he had this heart attack in 1999. And so it was shortly after that. So it was 2000, 2001, where Eric provided me these notes, and he said to me, he said, Oak is pretty sick. I don't know if he's going to make it. And if he dies, release these notes. And so that was the deal. And then what happened was that I held these notes for years and years. And then I heard Oak Shannon go in this interview, and some of the stuff he was saying, I just absolutely believe was not true. For example, he was making this claim that the only reason that Oak Shannon had phoned him was to find out about Eric Davis. Was he a reliable guy? But if you actually look at the actual Wilson leak, you'll see the phone call took place 3 years, almost 2 years, 3 years before he went to see Eric Davis. And the other thing was that the phone call took place for 2 hours. So you don't need a 2-hour phone call to say, is Eric Davis a good guy? And basically it wasn't until Melinda, and we had the meeting with Melinda and I and Nicole, and that's when we discovered this thing, the APT10 thing, that there was this connection that we realized what was in the Wilson leak notes was APT10. That Oak Shannon had talked to Wilson about APT10, and it's in the notes, but it's called ATP10, Advanced Theoretical Physics, rather than Advanced Physics 10, and it was in the Shannon notes. And then we realized that he had a 2-hour conversation, and it appeared to me he had briefed Wilson on this meeting they had in 1985, because Wilson was probably saying, this is garbage. They cut me out of the loop. I couldn't get anything. And then Oak Shannon would have said, hey, we got cut out too. Guess what? And he would tell him the whole story, how they tried to figure it out in 1985, and there was all these closed doors and stuff like that. And that sort of explained the reason this 2-hour phone conversation, and the fact that Wilson said, the time isn't right, I can't do it right now. But he had gone to get the job as the head of Defense Intelligence. And then as soon as he retires, then he said, now I can do it. I'm retired. And it's sort of like me. I've got nothing to lose. Who cares? I'm going to go and talk to Eric Davis. So a lot of the pieces came together, but it wasn't until that second meeting where Melinda and I and Nicole, when Melinda said, hey, that APT10, that's in the Wilson document. I did, it is. And then we looked it up, and you can see this direct connection that it appears that Shannon actually briefed Wilson on these meetings from 1985.
Makes perfect sense. I think isn't it AP10 in the
Yes.
data?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
AP10 is in the Wilson document.
Yeah.
ATP10 is in the
Oak's notes.
Wilson, the Oak Shannon notes.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I mean, it's obviously the same thing.
Yeah.
It makes perfect sense that they would that the ATP guys would think we're very compatible with what Wilson just tried to do. Because like you got Wilson, who went on his wild goose chase in 97 to get to the center of the labyrinth, and he gets the door slammed on him. And that's really exactly what the working group was doing in the 1980s.
Yeah.
They were essentially trying to get to the center of that labyrinth. And so it's really easy to see why. And of course, they would all learn about it through Mitchell and through Will Miller. You know, what happens? Well, Wilson goes on his 2-month journey to get to the Holy Grail. He gets slammed down, but he was in touch with Commander Will Miller, another Navy guy. Miller clearly told Greer on the one hand, and obviously had to have told Mitchell. And so Mitchell is the connection to the whole NIDS group, all the Bigelow's guys. So Mitchell obviously would have told Putoff and Davis and Green and probably Alexander and all of those guys.
Yeah.
So they knew about it immediately. And so you could see like the wheels turning in that group, thinking, we got to get to Wilson. We got to get to Wilson. But he was still working at DIA at that time.
Yeah, because
So
that's the thing.
Fascinating story.
So that's the thing that was sort of, that I got the impression was that the NIDS people would have had like what problems we're going to work on. So what do you think of the Holman film? And then they would have said, what do you think about this meeting with Greer with Wilson? Do you think with Wilson? And then they would say, let's get someone to get to Wilson. And so then they use Eric Davis.
Exactly.
And as I said, there's one of the few secrets I'm still keeping is conversations I had with Eric Davis, and I can absolutely guarantee you and swear to you that Wilson was not the highest level person that Eric Davis was talking to. He talked to a couple of people that would just blow you away. And that's the thing. They were trying to get to the bottom
at the time back in 2002, Grant.
Yep. And that's why I no longer dealt with them, because I couldn't keep my mouth shut. I sort of leaked who Eric Davis was talking to, and he was absolutely furious. And I can see it, because he would talk about it. He said, and this you talked about a little bit earlier. He said it's not so much that you're going to lose your security clearance, which that is part of it, but the way Eric Davis described to me is intelligence blowback. So as soon as something like this happens, it all just explodes. And then it's like, okay, who's going to get fired? Who's going to lose his security clearance? But the worst part about it was that he described to me is they're all working, and it probably works with Hell Put Off, where Hell's trying to figure out what the people above him are doing, and he's keeping it secret. And it's the old idea that if you release what you're told, then nobody will ever talk to you again. And that's what happened when I got the Wilson leak document. When I heard that Danny Silva had it, and James, remember I told you, you talked to me, and I said, if Danny's got this document, let me tell you what, if Danny puts this document out, he'll be the most famous person that ever lived. But remember this, nobody will ever talk to you again.
Right.
Because it's the old thing. It's the old deal where you blew it. You released the secret, and then nobody talks to you. And that's this intelligence blowback thing. That's the thing that they fear the most, I think, is they're trying to figure out what's going on above them, and they can't talk because otherwise their people are going to start talking to them, because Eric Davis can't keep his mouth shut. Cameron can't keep his mouth shut. That's the thing they're most afraid of, I think.
Yeah, and Danny had sent it to me, and I was reading it. I'm like, holy shit, this is what Grant has been telling me about. And I went to Eric. I said, hey, Eric, just so you know, this is out there, and I'm not going to put it out, but it's coming out. So, and we were waiting like every day, looking, like waiting for it to
so are we.
and like for months. And then one day it finally happened. We're like, oh shit. So, but we weren't going to release it again, because we're talking to Hal and Eric and everybody else. And, even at that point I'd sent it to Gary, and Gary had some interesting words to say about it, that he said some of it publicly now, on Ross Coulthart's program. And I think even on Tucker Carlson, maybe, talking about the notes and their authenticity. So,
Grant and I talked about this in the months before. Grant, you said to me, now you're in the box I'm in.
Yeah, you told me.
And that's really true. I wasn't going to say anything about it, but in early June, I was on an email thread, and I got to go back and look at it, but people were starting to talk about it on this email thread that I was on. And I thought, the hell with it. This is coming out. So I
give you credit for doing it. I'll always acknowledge that I give you full credit for absolutely putting your career on the line and going in, because all these guys, you're maybe in a worse box, because I don't know how Put Off a lot. Well, you know them a lot better than me. And to actually, take guys that and then go take a position that's going to put them in a lot of difficulty. That was the problem I had. So I really give you credit that you put your career on the line to actually go public with what you had.
Well, thanks. I don't think anyone got mad at me. I don't think any of the people in that group were angry with me. I've never revealed who showed me those notes in 2006. There've been some very smart guesses about it, but I've never confirmed, and I'm just not going to. But I just felt like, look, it was at that point, they were clearly leaking out. They were clearly going to leak out, probably even that week. So I just figured I'm going to do it.
And one other interesting story that we should add to this was, James Rigney was actually getting very upset at me. He said, these things aren't going anywhere. And I said, I did my job. They're on the internet. That's what I said I was going to do for you. They're on the internet. And I said, you're the guy that you don't know these people. You can put this out. It's up to you to mail. So then I said, you can mail to a bunch of people. And I think he actually emailed you or gave you a copy or whatever. But we were having this sort of fight. And then at one point he phones me up and he said, hey, did you give Dolan a copy of these documents? And this is one of the most important things that confirms that the Wilson documents are real. He said, did you give Dolan a copy of these documents? I said, no. And he said, you must have. I said, no, I didn't. I'm sure I didn't give Dolan a copy of these documents. He said, he's on Jimmy Church talking about it. I said, he is? So
Oh, no, but
I went, and that was the December
Right.
before. And you were
That's right.
confirming on there that you had seen these documents. And I'm listening. I'm like, my shit, he's talking about the same documents.
I had
Or
no
maybe I did give him a
idea.
copy of the documents. I'm thinking,
It's
maybe I
so
did.
crazy. I'm so glad we're talking about this. Yeah, because I was shown them in 06. I started talking about all of that from 2007, 2008, 09, 2010, but I wasn't talking about having seen the notes. What I talked about was having confirmation about Greer's meeting with Wilson and confirmation from my own source that that Wilson was denied access and by lawyers and the program managers and all of that. And so I had like a basic, rough, very rough, no details, but I had a basically true understanding of what happened. And I talked about that for years, and then I kind of stopped talking about it, but it never went away from me. Hell, I wrote about it in volume 2 of UFOs in the National Security State, 2009. If anyone really is curious, it's in that book, plus in a lot of other places. But I had never mentioned that I had seen actual notes, several pages. I saw 2 or 3 pages of those notes, and including the line, not of this earth, not by man, not by human hands. In fact, I quoted it once in an interview with Gene Steinberg in 07. But I'd never mentioned that I'd seen notes until that interview with Jimmy Church.
Yeah.
Jimmy's like, what's something important that's happened to you? You've never told anyone. And I thought at this point, it's like all these years later, I didn't give a shit anymore. And I just said, yes, I saw these notes, but I had no idea that you had those full, all 15 pages in your possession, and that other people did too. Because I didn't get a copy of those notes until April of 2019.
Yeah.
So
And I had
kind
him
of
and I had him in November. And then I think I talked to James about them in December. And so when James phoned me and said, oh, Danny Silva's got a copy, and then I still don't want to get involved. So I said, he does? I said, so how many pages? He says, 15. I said, yeah, it sounds about right. I didn't want to.
Yeah, and
yeah, it sounds about right.
and you know, again, just for people watching and listening, you know, I think it's great that Rich was the guy to do it, because it's really come full circle, because he was shown 2 pages of the notes. And, you know, as Rich knew, you know, I had recently got Leslie Kean on the record to say, hey, you know, when did you first see the notes? And she said, yeah, it was like 2007 or 2008. She was at a conference and was taken into a car, and she was not allowed to record or take pictures. And she was shown the full 15 pages.
Yeah.
And
you know,
Jacques Vallée is now confirming he saw them 8 years before.
Yeah, and again, I interviewed Jacques the following week and said, "Hey, Jacques, when's the first time you saw the notes?"
Yeah,
and you know, again, he saw them early on, and
wouldn't Jacques have been on the science advisory board, just like Dr. Mitchell? Wasn't
I would think he would have seen them early.
Well, he would have had them. He would have had them himself, just like Dr. Mitchell did, for the same reason.
I'm just gonna say I guarantee anything that Jacques is just treading very carefully, as he tends to do when it comes to like those kind of matters. And, you know, again, I appreciate him going on the record and saying, yeah, I saw them before. You know, you fill in the blank with your imagination as to when he saw them, probably when everybody else did.
Science advisory board.
Sure, a lot of those guys knew. That's
why
I always said.
I knew that Leslie Kean had seen them, because she told me right when the whole thing blew up. When I put myself out there, I said, these are real. She was kind enough to write to me. She said, yeah, I've known about them for almost as long as you, but I can't go public at this time. And so I was like, yeah, I get it.
And I know
that you did.
I can't sit here and think, you guys, you know, here we are on here talking about the Wilson Davis notes. And I think probably all of us, when that public hearing happened last May, the congressional hearing, and the congressman read into the congressional record, Wilson Davis, that all of our jaws, I mean, mine hit the floor. I'm sure all of ours did. It's just like, oh my God.
It was a nice moment.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
and
that's a reminder to me is
Vindication, Richard, vindication.
It's a surprise. I wasn't expecting it.
it's always a reminder
None of
to
us
you
were.
guys
That's what
said
I'm
right
saying.
from the
We were
word
like, wow.
go was the idea that these guys, that Richard and I have had some contact and Melinda's had contact with, that these guys had these little groups like the NIDS thing, that these guys know an awful lot of material, especially if
Yes,
you read Jacques Vallée's book. I remember it was 3 or 4 when I was reading the book, I'm going, oh my God, he's driving over everybody here. And most people don't read his books. He tells all sorts of stuff that I went, oh, I didn't know that. For example,
Those are
we just
amazing
found
books.
Dr. Eric Walker for years. We wrote books on him. And then when I'm reading Jacques Vallée, I suddenly find out that Hell Puthoff went to Dr. Eric Walker. We never told me that. I'm going, oh, this is my case. I didn't even know this. And Jacques tells a lot of stuff that if you read his books and read them carefully, you realize he's telling a lot of secrets.
Oh,
and now he's coming out with
Forbidden Science, people. If anyone listening, go
Forbidden
read
Science.
and
it.
2,
so
3,
there's
and 4
volumes so far.
there's currently 4 volumes, and volume 5, from what I understand, is in like the proofreading stages, and that covers very
This
interesting
period.
years. So
Yeah.
I'm going to be
This
very
very
interested
period. And
to see, what he says in there.
There's nothing like that. There's no other example of writing in the UFO field that's like that.
Right.
Extremely valuable.
and if this includes his time at NIDS with the release of Wilson Davis, which it is, like you were just saying, James, that time period, it could be that we're going to get some stuff in there. But he knows this is in play, and maybe for that reason he edits it out. I hope it'll be in there. I hope.
Well, and he made it a point to include the Wilson Davis meeting and notes in the appendix of Trinity, right? He intentionally included them.
So that maybe we can take that as a sign that Forbidden Science 5 will have that in there. That'd be.
That's why
awesome.
both times I interviewed him, I'm like, okay, this is fair play. I mean, he made it a point to include it.
Okay. All right. So if he included it, he's probably going to have it in 5 and discuss it. So I look forward to that. I think it's important here. We all know on this panel, but for the viewers that may not know, to express why Wilson Davis, the meeting and the notes are so important. First off, that the meeting happened, that Dr. Eric Davis interviewed Admiral Thomas Wilson and did so on behalf of NIDS / the working group. Why is it tie in the working group, not just NIDS? Well, that's where the Oak Shannon importance is, because that goes back to it's the same people, and how that came to be and why Eric was there on Shannon's, But the important thing is, and that's what this panel was going to be about, is it gets into the fact that there were vehicles in the possession of the government / and or
Exactly.
in the possession of private industry, intact according to the notes.
Right.
Somehow they got that crash retrieved, shot down. To me, shot down or crash retrieve would be the same thing, because either way a craft's coming down. So you're getting a craft that came down, as opposed to something just handed to us, which I wouldn't rule out that possibility either.
Yeah, and the funny
Remember
thing
when
is,
Eric Davis wrote to you, James?
exactly,
about
I'm
that?
talking to Eric Davis while
Okay,
this whole
yes.
thing's going on, and
Yeah.
just like shortly before, he gives me the comment about intact craft, which is like highlighted in the notes. It's like, wow. I mean, that
It's like a week before the notes came out.
right.
That was
It's-
after Lou Elizondo did a thing on Tucker Carlson where he talked about that we have acquired their technology. Like he
Yes.
put that right out there. And you, James, wrote to Eric Davis. And Davis, I never forget this. He said he gave you this very carefully worded and edited reply, during which he actually added the word recovered, I think, where it was originally a crash retrieval, but he added and recovered to indicate it was more than just crashes.
Yeah, so in the first comment, he didn't have landed. And then he gave me amended one, and he said, here, and again, he gave me this for public use. And he said, no, here, this is the one. And it had crashed and landed craft. And we're talking about off-world vehicles, as he quoted in the New York Times piece that he gave to Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal. Grant?
So this brings up one of the big questions that I've always looked at, and I'm sure Richard's looked at it, is the whole idea of how much is being leaked to us in terms of trying to control the narrative, whether it's Eric Davis or Hal Puthoff, or do they actually put stuff in their speeches? Are they leading us along? Jim Semivan, or is this all part of the plan, or what do you think about that?
You asking me?
Anybody?
I think they're putting out what they think they can get away with at this point.
Yes.
My feeling is that group, I don't think they're working from CIA headquarters or any directions. I don't believe that. I think they are their own group. They've got their own center of gravity, as it were. I think for many years they've been this has been their mission, and definitely get the feeling with these guys, they know exactly how far they can walk up to that line without stepping over the line.
Right.
Like they're really good at that. Puthoff and Davis, even Davis. I mean, Davis just talks so much, but he always stops just when he has to. So I think just like barely, but he does.
Yeah.
And maybe someone has to pull him back a little bit.
I agree.
Yeah, but they know what they're doing. And the real question, and I don't have the answer to this, is there a motivation beyond that? Are they trying to make money? Are they trying to get a contract? What are they trying to do? Are they trying to save the world? I don't know. What is their actual motivation? But they have definitely been pushing.
And Richard, I'll go with, I think their motivation may have changed over the years. That I was having this long conversation, as I said, with Omega last night on the phone. And one of the things we were saying, and I was saying to him, and I wanted to express today, was don't anyone ever forget that these guys sat on everything they knew about this subject since before '85, when they were first getting together as a group. You go back to Jacques Vallée talking about the invisible college days, and stuff, and you go forward into the working group and its various incarnations over time into the stars and today. But you go through everything and you go, well, wait, until 5 years ago with the announcement of ATIP/OSAP, until that happened, there was nothing coming out from these guys. And in the Bigelow days, after the original aviary days, when they first went to Bigelow, even pre-NIDS, before calling it NIDS, but they were dealing with him, they were getting funding in large amounts for various projects they did. And it was one beef in the alien abduction research community that they did all this work other than publishing Unusual Personal Experiences, which is the tiny little handbook based upon the findings at the Roper poll and those numbers. So they did publish that, but prior to that, and all the stuff they did with the MUFON files, all stuff they did with the John Carpenter stuff, everything going back, you go, these guys weren't putting anything out there. They were sitting on, they weren't sharing anything. And they were a big black hole for research to kind of like go and disappear. And yet they were having funding from various sources. We know for sure history of Bigelow. And you go, well, wait a second, they never put anything out there. And even now, everything that they know, yes, we get some breadcrumbs in Jacques Vallée's work, but other than that, they're not really putting anything out there that to the depth that these guys know. They have been deeply involved in this subject for well over 40 years, probably 50 or 60, but well over 40, and that they know a tremendous amount of data, and they hold back on that. But now all of a sudden they're offering up some stuff. Are they coming clean with everything they know? No, of course not. But I agree with you, Richard, that maybe they're kind of putting a little bit out there. And so if all along, and I said they were at those original meetings in '85, and I already knew it from Jack's notes, but it became abundantly clear. And what I think was Shannon taking the minutes, because it's so detailed, it was like he was maybe the minute taker for the meeting. That's kind of my theory, but I think there's reason behind it. But in Shannon's notes, it becomes so clear that the gentlemen at these days of meetings, it wasn't just one, it was multiple meetings over like a week, if I got that correct, that they were there representing the large engineering and aerospace companies that they worked for. Because it was quick to say, You know, these 3 guys were there from Lockheed, and these guys were here from McDonnell Douglas, and these guys here were from Los Alamos, you know, and so they were all representing, and you know that they were there getting information at that meeting to take back to the people they worked for. So I think originally they were like, let's find out how much there is, how much the government knows, how much, because they had 1 foot, I think, in the covert world and 1 foot not, and that they were getting information to take back to their companies and everything. And over time, then you go into the NIDS era, at, you know, many forward years, but you start to go, well, then these guys were doing research for their own interest, possibly. At least for Bigelow's interest, we know that, but for their own interest, until OSAP, when someone approached the government for funding and the Pentagon came in and said, we'll fund it, and changed it from, you know, from BASS, Bigelow Aerospace Advanced Science Studies, to OSAP. And did BASS go away? No, I've always contended BASS morphed into OSAP, because at that point, the Pentagon got involved and took it over. And headed up, you know, and took it over, and they got Pentagon funding. Bigelow was probably like, whoosh, you know, not spending all my money now, you know, or spending somebody else's money.
That actually is a very logical theory. I mean,
yeah,
OSAP started in 07 or earlier. Do we
07.
know?
So it started, they started trying to get it ready in 07, but in 08, it was signed off.
Yeah. So when did well, NIDS ended a couple of years earlier than that,
Yeah.
didn't it?
Right.
But there was
4 or 5 is
BASS.
shut down.
Then there was
gradually,
BASS.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The
Also, I've got the
worked in
funding.
BASS didn't end.
Yeah,
Well, I guess it was just kind of a segue from
yeah,
NIDS into BASS. and then
NIDS
to-
No,
morphed into
BASS was,
BASS.
yeah.
Yeah.
BASS
That's-
was the contract for OSAP. That was a contractor for OSAP.
Yeah, and so and BASS was a reforming of NIDS. So to me, it's
you know,
like one morphs into the other. I have a timeline in my other presentation
Yeah.
where all these things overlap. If you do a, you know, time
Yeah.
schedule, they all
This
kind of
makes sense.
overlap. And people I knew, like Abductions, by one name or another name, depending on when they were involved.
Well, one thing I'd like to add to this, though, I see it a little bit different, and that is that to me, all these Avery types went either where the money was or where the information was. So you see when NIDS has got the money, they're there. But when Firmage comes along, Firmage has got a lot of money. They all went to Firmage. And if you saw the videos that were done, Kit Green and Putoff were saying, oh, Firmage is the greatest thing, and he's doing science right and all this kind of stuff. And then when Tom DeLonge comes along, Tom DeLonge doesn't necessarily have the money, but it's like when they told the story about how Putoff tells the story how he was brought in by Kit Green. He said, do you know who this Tom DeLonge guy is? And he said, no, not really. And he said, well, this guy's they're talking to him. And it's sort of like, well, why are they talking to this Tom DeLonge guy? And it's sort of, they all jumped there because they realized that there's these generals and there's all these guys that are dealing with Tom DeLonge. So you may not get any money from him. You're going to get information. Like, why are they talking to Tom DeLonge? What are these generals? Who are the generals and all this kind of stuff? So to me, it's either they're following the money or they're following the information. They're jumping around wherever the money or the information is. That's where they go.
That kind of helps make my point of, I think what they were doing changed over time, because at that point, I think it's obvious to me, what was Tom DeLonge, rock star, you know, voice to a younger generation, that they used him to put out a message and do the beginnings of what was kind of a controlled disclosure, you know, that, I mean, come on, why go to Tom? You know, they're going to Tom because of who he is and their ability to put out a message and address a younger audience.
And just to add, I think that does make sense. I mean, a pop star or rock star who has a strong interest in the subject, that was obvious, and is a smart guy. I mean, he's intelligent, you know, so I think you could look at him and say, yeah, he's definitely interested. He knows a lot about this already. He's got a good foundation. And he's got influence.
Yeah, and funny, I mean, I grew up listening to, I'm a millennial, right? I grew up
Yeah.
listening to Tom DeLonge, buying, you know, Blink 182 records when I was a teenager. And I remember as a kid, he had the song called Aliens Exist. And it's a whole song about, you know, abductions and aliens. And I think he even mentions MJ12 and Majestic in it. And I'm like, what, you know, so that's pretty incredible. But
And one point I'd like to point out, because I pointed out when everybody always has this impression that Tom DeLonge gathered this group together, and he didn't gather anybody together except for maybe phoning up John Podesta. But other than that, they all came to him. And it started with this barbecue outside of the where this guy phones him and says, if they ask you to get in a car, don't get in a car. Just don't get in the back of the car. And this is serious, and I'm not fooling around. Would you like to do this this thing for Skunk Works on the parking lot? And if I can talk to the director for 5 minutes. And then you got to remember, if you remember the story Tom told when they were in the skiff, where Tom, before Robert Weiss comes out of the room, he's with the head scientist and this other guy who I don't know who it is. And then they ask him, they say, hey, what's with the website? Well, what's with the website? And he had strange, what was it called? Strange something. And it was like the National Enquirer of, the craziest conspiracy theories. And what's with the website? And he said that Robert Weiss saved his ass, because Robert Weiss came out of the room just as he was trying to explain why he had this conspiracy website, which indicated to me that they picked him partly because he had that website that they could he would go for these ideas and they could sort of manipulate and control the narrative and stuff like that and put stuff to him. But I found that very interesting, that a lot of people don't realize that Tom DeLonge had this absolute insane website in 2012 and 2013, and they were confronting him with it when he was in the skiff.
Yeah, but I don't want to say in defense to him, but it's because of stuff like Skinwalker Ranch and those really high strangeness things that were going on that they observed. That they probably figured he was also open to that, because
Sure.
that's the stuff that people don't want to talk about, but nonetheless is reported and recorded over, as far back as human history goes, but another important note on that Lockheed thing was that they perked up when they heard him start talking about consciousness. And I don't want to go too much on a rant on that, but I did want to mention before we move on that, again, if you think that Bass went away, now there's Bigelow Institute for Consciousness Studies. But, again, in loose threads, I think Omega and Hermetic Penetrator added something that it was a quote from like 2018 or 2019. And they're basically talking about the experiencers. Rich, do you recall that?
Sorry, my cat was trying to get my attention. Just say that last thing over again.
There was in loose threads, there was a quote about something they said in 2018 or 2019. I know you guys discussed it on your show a little, that they got confirmation about something, the way contact works. I'm drawing a blank right now on what exactly it was.
Offhand, I can't remember that.
Yeah.
I remember a few of the things about loose threads that we should discuss, but I wanted to ask Grant. Grant, so I've wondered this. Do you believe that DeLonge was just selected in order to be manipulated for a particular goal? Like a goal involving any kind of deception, or at least a kind of a rollout of disclosure that had a certain spin to it? Is he a tool that was being used by, and who was the first person to decide, I want that guy?
Well, the story starts with this guy. I didn't really identify. He said he was his uncle worked for Skunk Works. Do you remember, Jim? So there was the guy had some connection.
It was one of his friends. His friends had one of his fans had a family member.
Yeah.
That worked in Lockheed, and that's how he got the Lockheed thing.
It may have just
no,
been
he did it.
Yeah.
One of his band members, I think it was Mark Hoppus, had a family member too in the service.
And it may have just been a thing that unraveled where the people at Skunk Works sort of know the UFO thing, and Tom was singing about it and talking about it. So let's bring him in for this party, because the one thing that they couldn't control was Tom said, "Yeah, I'll do it if I can get 5 minutes with the head guy." And then he gets the 5 minutes, and that's when they bring him into the skiff. And maybe they're just sort of poking him to see where it can go. That's where they like the whole deal where they ask him, they start questioning him about the whole thing with the website. Why have you got this website up? And Tom's all embarrassed by this website. Or they're questioning me. And then as you mentioned, they mentioned when Tom brings up consciousness. But people got to remember that at that time he's not he's with Stephen Greer, so he's believing the whole they're good aliens and consciousness and stuff. He's hanging out with Stephen Greer, and he's actually afraid that the government is. You remember he had the tapes that Steve had given him the tapes, and he's hiding them under the bed, and then he's saying, "Oh, they're tapping my phone, and I've moved to 3 different places, 3 different phones, and they're still getting this interference on my phone, and they're out." He thinks the government's going to whack him. So he's sort of that thing where they're sort of testing him. I don't think there was an intentional plan, and it was like maybe poke him to see if we can use this guy. And then Tom makes this famous speech where he says, "You guys ain't doing it right, and I can do it," and that sort of thing. And maybe they bought into that as part of the deal, is that, yeah, maybe we can use this guy. But he does seem to be the type of guy that, because that's what I always saw was the Lazar thing. People always dispute the Lazar thing. And I always say the Lazar thing was a complete setup. They knew Bob Lazar only worked on the site for 5 or 6 days. He was never there. And the reason that he went and took Lear and all these guys out to see the test is because they weren't allowing him to go up and work at the site. And that the first question they asked him in the second interview was, "What's your relationship to John Lear, and what do you think about him?" So before he went on the site, they knew that he knew John Lear. They wanted him to see. They showed him a bunch of stuff. They wanted him to take it and go and show it to John Lear, because nobody would believe John Lear. So you get the story out, and then nobody believes it because John Lear's telling the story. And it's this sort of all this side manipulation type stuff that I think that's and I think you make up the point, Richard, that it's never very clear what they're doing. It's whatever they're doing, it's not clear that the government is doing this or doing that. It's sort of like you're always guessing as to what's actually going on. And they've done that well, that they've been able to hide what their actual intention is.
Yeah, I think when it comes to the DeLonge story, because at one point I kind of asked Jim Semivan about this, and he downplayed it, but I had to go, okay, what if the truth is somewhere in the middle? That they seize the moment, he goes to the picnic, like you were just saying, that whole story, and at Lockheed, and people meet him, and maybe someone there, because they had permission to invite him, and then so some people there looked him up and said, well, what's this guy's thing? And it could be they just went, wait a second, we have an opportunity here. And it could have been more casually coming together, and then the opportunity was seized, that they then used him in some way. And now this is the interesting other part, is whether he was used by intelligence, because you have Jim Semivan entering the picture and everything, and like, was he used by them, or was he being used by the working group, because you have Hal and his connections and those guys. So
but Hal wasn't involved at the beginning.
They're working together,
right? And
yeah, but I understand that, but the fact that those guys got involved, it's like, and I can understand completely the draw for Tom, because you'd go, well, wait a second, here's a bunch of people who really know something, they're sharing stuff with me, I'm going to play along with all sides because I'm getting the inside track, and I'm part of that. Yeah. And so I understand that draw. Anyways, but I think it may have come together more loosely. Like I said, I've talked to Jim. Now, of course, you guys already know I'd be very, why I'm friends with Jim. I also have to, take everything with a giant grain of salt and realize, could there be anything else ever going on here? So I constantly question that. But I felt like, okay, he's steering me away from a deliberateness behind it all, yet there seems to be some amount of deliberateness. And that's when I had to kind of realize the story may be somewhere in the middle, where it started off one way and evolved and then became, more as it went along. And still is, because, you get into the whole story of Chris and Lou, and I don't know the answer, and I'd be interested what you guys have to say about them leaving to the stars and stepping out and doing their own thing, and what really generated that, because you have now I know I do know a lot of it was because the hi Kitty.
If Linda Moulton Howe is watching this,
hi Kitty.
Just really quick,
I love it. But the intelligence, sorry, I'll just say real quick, the intelligence, oh God, I lost my train of thought though, but just at the point that other people became involved. It could have been more just fortuitous, like it was, you know, things kind of unrolled at a time, and then it became like, well, we can steer this a certain direction.
Well,
so again, when it comes to the working group, I see as over the years, their view, what they wanted to do, why they were existing, was changing.
right.
Partially also driven by the projects they were working on, but also as their knowledge of the subject changed. Anyway, so there we go.
But I personally, at this point, I'm more interested. It's like, okay, we know that, and there's a lot of good, you know, records and information for that. I'm more interested, and I do want to move on from this point. But I'll let you have your piece. But I'm more interested in McCaslin and Weiss and individuals that are like real, like those are the inside track guys, right? If there was ever a legacy guy, I mean, McCaslin, you know.
But you got to remember, James, it was never intended that they come out. They were always going to stay in the background.
What was their intention in trying to help Tom?
The same as
Exactly.
Bill Moore said, he had 24 people that were feeding him stuff and telling him what to do.
Yeah, I mean, but
Same-
we're talking
same
about
principle.
aviary guys who are half in and half out. McCaslin
but
seems like an all-in kind of guy. Like,
and you
this
guys,
is the
I go
guy.
back to, and I go back to Jim Semivan, and I have this somewhere in notes where he said we're 50 some odd people
Yeah, but
behind this.
again,
So everyone kept going to the
Semivan
stars,
was,
to the stars, like 10 people. No, he
Yeah,
said
but-
we're 50 some odd people
yeah, but what
behind this happening. So then you go, who
Right.
are the other people?
But Semivan, he was somebody who was brought in, and you know, and again, he was brought in, and two individuals who we all know gave him the briefing, right? Like saying, this is, we're reading you into the program kind of thing. But we're talking about, like, again, McCaslin, this is somebody who's like on the inside clearly. Like, if there was a legacy program or something like Zodiac, this guy would be on top of my list.
Okay, but
like,
but
he's telling
Tom
Tom the
is
story about we found a life form. So this is the guy he's talking about, the general who is in charge, like, with this weighing on his conscious that he has these deep secrets, not half in, half out. This guy's like in part of the epicenter at least.
So, but it's the same principle as Robert Lazar. The day after, the second day he was at the site, what do? They give him 125 documents to read about the program. They give him everything. They just give him all this stuff. And it's the same as Tom DeLonge. Like, who the hell's going to believe Tom DeLonge? I remember the day before, if you remember, a couple days before the New York Times article came out, even Tom DeLonge didn't believe it. Tom DeLonge tweeted, he said, "Oh, another delay." Ugh, like he wasn't believing it either. And it's sort of like nobody believed Tom DeLonge until December the 16th in 2017. Until then, everybody thought he was a total crazy guy. And as soon as that came, and as soon as the WikiLeaks came, then they exposed all the thing, and everybody said, "Oh, they are talking to this guy." Same as they were talking to Bill Moore, they were talking to Lazar, and they kept it covered. They didn't anticipate that this would fall apart. And the key thing that I think is important is not that these two guys left Tom DeLonge, but the fact that Jim Semivan stayed with them. So they've got their fingers in every pie. And if you remember the story of Chase Brandon was a CIA guy who came out and wrote the book about how the CIA dealt with Roswell. And he said, if you want to read a good book, read the book. If you want to learn something, read between the lines. And it was this whole idea that the reason Semivan stayed was because part of the plan is to put this stuff through Hollywood, fictionalize it, put it through Hollywood. That's why CIA's got a guy at Hollywood and says, "Oh, James, I hear you're doing a movie that's got to do with the CIA. Have you ever been to the CIA? Would you like to go to CIA? Would you like to come for a visit?" And they get on your side and they walk beside you rather than confronting you. So, I mean, they're still using Tom DeLonge to get this message out. That's why it always amazed me until it made sense that why would Semivan stay with them? The company's sort of bankrupt. They're not doing anything. Everybody else is left. They look like a bunch of fools, and yet Semivan stays with them.
Well, I mean, just for To the Stars, I mean, they just got some really good movie contracts. I want to see it personally. The Secret Machines.
There you go.
It's taken up by Legendary Films. I mean, they did that movie Dune, right?
That's part of the plan. That's part of the plan.
So whatever angle they're working, they're succeeding in. If you got a contract with Legendary to put out the Secret Machines.
But yeah, they're doing, I've talked to Jim about this. They're doing books and movies,
right,
and TV things, and a bunch of entertainment stuff. Now Jim tells me a story that they're trying to make good on their investors, but like Grant, I can't help read into it, like you were just saying, Grant, like that this is to put information out there, and so it's a continuation of what they've always done. And even their approaching DeLonge was or not approaching, but they're involving him once they, you know, the way it unfolded, as I said.
Real
But
question is
I
where,
think they
how
were
high up?
seizing the moment, you know. How high up is a good
How
question.
high up does it go? Who's making, you know, are they just their own independent faction, or are they working for an official agency? It's really the
And
question.
we're hearing through what's going on in Congress and the Senate is, and I think we're all hearing this, I'm hearing it from multiple people who say they're talking to Senate staffers and stuff, that, you know, that there's infighting, there's pushback, that there's the NDAA is going through, but it's not without its detractors. Now, it did pass both the House and the Senate by large majorities. And so my understanding is it's all in there already to get signed by Biden, unless someone here's heard otherwise. But I'm hearing, you know, but it's not been without pushback. So there's obviously those inside that want this. So when you go to Jim Semivan and DeLonge, and you go to, you know, McCaslin and everything, you go to there and Weiss, and, you know, there's obviously those folks that want this out there. And then there's the folks that don't, because they're probably at risk of losing their budgets and their projects, and you know, and the long history of this, and the reverse engineering and the holding of materials by private companies, you know. So there's probably a lot of pushback from that end, you know, maybe it's from the private end, or from those running the SAP programs approving the funding.
And getting exactly to who might be involved in that group, or past, present, you know, and loose threads. There's the very important point of Bobby Ray Inman. And, you know, this is kind of like an old UFO story, but it's an important one. I think people nowadays should be familiar with it. So either Rich or Grant, if you want to weigh in on that, on Bobby Ray Inman and how.
Well, I can comment on that based upon, I think I have a little bit different view of the present situation than other people do with this disclosure thing. Is I go back to Dr. Eric Walker in 1990 when we were talking to him, and when Hal went to talk to him, and when Kit Green went to talk to him. Kit Green went and says, "Oh, I've got a security clearance to talk to you. I'd like to talk to you." And they talk about the Glomar Explorer for half an hour, and they're all buddy. As soon as he brings up UFOs, the place goes nuts, and Walker starts freaking out. And Walker says, "You give me 2 reasons why I should release the story, the answer." And then Kit Green gives him 2 answers. And then Kit says, "Well, apparently I didn't get the right answers," because he threw him out of the office, and basically said, "You give me a letter from the president." And what Eric Walker said is what I think is the pushback is. Eric Walker was on Defense Science Board. He was Institute for Defense Analysis when he was there, when they formed DARPA, when they formed the Jasons and stuff. He was this high level guy. And he said, "You tell me why we should change the rules to satisfy your curiosity." And it's the whole idea is in the end, it is just basically curiosity. UFO researchers just want to know. It's like he said, and then he said, the question is, so when you get the answer, what are you going to do with it? And the question is, what are we going to do with it? We're not going to do anything with it. We're going to go, "That was good. You know, now I can tell my neighbors that I was right all along." And basically, so the guys on the inside say, "We don't care what you guys just want it for curiosity. This is national security stuff, and we are not going to release this. This is the highest level secret we've got." And that's what you see going on with the Congress thing. Is I make the joke. I say we had Blue Book, and Blue Book shut basically the thing down and said there's no threat to national security. But at least when Blue Book was there, we had the cases and we had the shapes of the objects. Now you say, well, what's the shape of the object? 144 cases. One was identified, and you say, what are the shapes? Can't tell you. That's classified. What about the cases? Oh, that's classified. And we're in a situation now where we know less than we did with Blue Book. And you see this pushback thing where all we've done is we've got Congress people now who know somewhat about what's going on, and still they're controlling the show. And we're not going anywhere. We're going backwards, and we're going to get some more, investigate UFOs again and stuff like that. They basically, you can see they've shut this thing down. And now you've got a situation where you've got a lame duck administration, Congress, where you have 2 two different parties controlling, and nothing's going to get done. It's for the next 2 years. Even now, you have senators who have, been not elected or House people, and they're changing seats, and they're not doing anything till the end of the year. And then, they're going to be playing games for the next 2 years. And this thing just drags on and on and on. And I would not be surprised if nothing happens in the next 2 years.
Right.
I'm with you,
I mean,
Grant.
and there is factions, and there are people allegedly, and Christopher Mellon confirmed this, that Eric Davis was in a defense briefing and was telling these individuals, about off-world vehicles and where they might be
So was
found,
Gary.
and the modus operandi of how the secrecy is maintained. Right?
Eric and Gary were in closed door sessions, and
Right.
and so were some of the pilots and various people, so
And where did it go?
That's what pushed. Well, that's what pushed
that's why we have the
the
language
NDAA.
now.
That's
We
why
have
we
the
have the
language.
language in the NDAA, is so that these folks can now turn around and testify publicly.
Okay, but Chris Mellon was
That's-
asked. Chris Mellon was asked, and he said, "I know of no plans for any Senate hearings or House hearings."
Chris has to be careful as what he says publicly.
Yes.
But I have heard a number from some people, the people that are involved in these briefings, that there are more briefings and hearings coming. It's
yeah,
already.
I've heard that too. People who know them directly have
But
told
they're not-
me
but
they
we
have been
got- but
asked.
if
They've
there's an
already been
opportunity-
asked and
but we've-
said that they will.
The hearings
there's
that
an
have happened so
opportunity
far have honestly have given us nothing, in my
Of
opinion.
course.
Right.
They gave us
I mean,
a reference to Wilson Davis. Yeah, it was great.
Okay,
But actually, there's been no
but Richard, if
follow
we're
up in the
talking,
public domain. Nothing. It's been nothing.
But
And I'm with
Richard-
Grant. I think Grant's
but
right.
okay, I agree with you guys that, okay, but I will say this. If what James and I are saying is right, that some of these people have already been approached to testify, someone's planning on something going on.
So
Now,
Yeah.
and Dan Sheehan tells me the reason that language, 31 pages of it, is in the NDAA is so that can happen. In other words, that language is in there because they're trying to give clearance to not only the people that have spoken, but also to encourage others. So it's a wait and see the reaction to that. But the NDAA language is going in there. It will get signed before the end of the year. It has to, because
It's
it's all the
whistleblower
defense and
friendly.
military. Well, all the defense and military spending for next year are in there. So it has, the whole NDAA package has to go through. And this is already in there. According to Dan Sheehan, this is already in there. It's not going to go through changes. It's locked in there, is what he's told me.
Yeah, and some of the people that they had wanted to speak with have already spoken to the right people. It's
Yes.
regardless
Okay,
of the language.
but
it's already going on.
you're talking behind closed doors. You're
That's right.
talking.
And Grant, I understand that, and I'm not saying this is it's a done deal, guys. Like this is
Yeah, and it may be
and
closed door hearings. It may be
this
more,
is where I really appreciate what George Knapp had to say, is like the closer you get to this thing, the harder that the gatekeepers are going to resist and fight back. And who knows what, and we're kind of probably seeing the rollout of some of that now. Like, things are getting more serious, and there's a clearly, again, there were all these articles and all, UAPs are real. Now it's like, it's all silent, right? And that you have this New York Times, Julian Barnes put out this hit piece on the report. And, again, the Daily Mail had to come up and say, no, that's actually all bullshit. This is what is kind of in the report and stuff. So we're seeing that play out, and we're going to continue to see it play out. There's factions, again, like if you want to say Collins Elite and the people involved with that, who
I
are.
don't think we
May
can
just
blame
be the
Collins
cripple.
And
Elite.
I want to get back to
purse
Inman, and the crash.
Yeah,
Okay,
and-
but take a look at.
Grant, go ahead.
Okay,
Grant, rip it.
So let's look at what Inman said. What did Inman do? He just was interviewed, and what he said. Oh, well, he said, I can absolutely assure you there is no life besides us in this galaxy. And the Phoenix Lights, that was jets on with their afterburners making a turn, and the Mogul balloon, and the drones, the Nimitz seeing the drones. They're going back, and they're playing the game. We've got the inner circle. There's no way. And I would say that the guys on the inside are going to be able to convince people that the core secrets here cannot be released, because they haven't got it figured out. And we're not going to give it to the Russians. We're not going to give it to the Chinese. And they're not, for the sake of people's interest or curiosity, they are not going to reveal these secrets, because it is of national security importance. And you can see Inman playing the game, that we're going back, and they're actually moved a step back. He didn't concede anything in that interview that he just did.
Right. And again,
well, I think both sides have a point here. I mean, I basically agree with Grant. I think that the people on the side of secrecy have way more cards to play, but
Yes,
I do think you can interpret this NDAA as a move, as a gambit by the other faction to try to create an opening. I mean, I think that's a fair statement. And really it's going to come down to, will they succeed? Will they actually be able to, with the few people in Congress who actually might give a damn and might be willing to help move that forward. But the real question is, what whistleblowers actually are going to be able to come forward without serious risk? And how significant are those whistleblower protections, by the way? I mean, I'm hearing that has got protections for whistleblowers. Is it true protection? The United States does not treat whistleblowers particularly well. So, I'll believe it when I see it. Right now, I think I agree with Grant that this is not gonna bust open. We're gonna be looking at it.
I agree with you guys with this one thing. It depends on the will of the senators and congressmen who are interested in this subject to know that language passed in huge numbers. Pretty much all of it is what I'm hearing from the House and the Senate. So there's obviously those on board that agree. And if they hold to that, now I know they didn't hold to getting the report, we still no report. So they didn't press it with that, but are they waiting? We don't know, so
can you ask Danny?
Regardless
Can you
that-
ask Danny about the
Sure.
protections? Because Danny would know. Are there protections for talking in classified hearings or in open hearings? Are they talking about that they're going to allow these people?
Well, they already
That's
had a lot of these
classified.
guys.
That's a good point.
Yeah, it's
A lot of-
classified.
they've
That's
already
not.
had. Hang on, they've already had these guys in classified hearings, so I've already done that with a bunch of them. My understanding is so that this could be public hearings, so those same people could go public. Now that's according to Dan. That's my understanding. Now I will ask him and clarify. And maybe James, maybe I can get Dan on to interview with you, or Grant, or whatever. We can do another panel with us and Danny. I'll ask him, because
Christopher Mellon.
do
So I
need
mean, again, if
clarity.
Christopher Mellon had an interview with Linda Moulton Howe, and he wanted to make clear that these protections are not so Lou Elizondo can come on a podcast and say, I saw a full intact craft. No,
it's for congressional hearings.
Right, but classified first.
Okay.
What we get in the public, I'm skeptical. I'm optimistic, but I'm skeptical but I also realize we can't use the past so much as a true barometer, in the sense that I didn't anticipate what happened in 2016, 2017, 2018 and forward happening, right? So we are in uncharted territories. The language in itself is we're in uncharted territory.
And to me, it's
anything,
the will.
Anything can happen from this point on. I do think that the gatekeepers, so to speak, Majestic, Zodiac, have a very strong hold on it, but they're not the only game in town anymore, and that's clear. And I think that is probably bewildering to them. For the first time ever, they have somebody pushing against them and succeeding to some extent.
Unfortunately, I feel that it's up to the Senate and Congress and that language and if their will is strong enough to push this forward, the senators and congressmen on board with this. And if their will is strong enough and they push it, but unfortunately we're all sitting back going, well, our Senate and the Congress gonna push this forward. You know, are they going to enact stuff in the NDAA once it goes in? I mean, we were all let down by no report. And so, you know, now there could be a lot of reasons. Maybe we're still getting it. Maybe it's just going through rewrite and editing to, you know, it may just be we're witnessing this dance, like we just said, between the secret keepers, the gatekeepers with the DOD and Senate and Congress trying to push the envelope. And so we could be, you know, witnessing that. Now, we all know in this, you know, in this room here, in this panel, that there's been 75 years or more of intense cover up. And, you know, so much has happened the last couple of years. I know we're all grateful for, but this is the beginning of a long haul. You know,
Yeah.
I don't think anyone should give up at this point. I mean, I've been in this field 34 years and haven't given up. Richard, you've been in it, you know, 25 or, you know, 28 and haven't given up. Grant, you've been in as long as me, maybe even longer, you know, and haven't given up. So it's like, wait a second, everyone, you know, this is a lot to undo, this 75 years of cover up. And I think we see these two sides fighting, and that's what we're seeing play out. And I think all we can do is hold their feet to the fire.
Yeah.
You
It's
know?
like,
But the fact that you haven't got the report would tend to indicate to me you need to push a little harder, because
Yeah.
we're losing
Exactly.
ground here.
yes.
It's going the other way.
Yeah. For
If
sure.
you can't get the report out, which is just going to say, well, we got 365 reports and half of them were unidentified, and that's all we can tell you. If you can't get that out, how are you going to get out whistleblowers that are going to say, oh yeah, there's some bodies over in this hangar, and there's
Right.
that's a long,
Absolutely,
stretch.
Grant. I think
a
you're
really good
absolutely
point.
right on that. And you know,
even in this field, I see pushback
yeah.
in
Oh,
that you have the people in this field, you have a crowd willing to say consciousness, like you and I, James, and Grant and Richard. We're definitely on board with that, no doubt. I mean, Grant's, that's his whole modus, right? is the consciousness stuff. So we have that, and then we have obviously the abductees and their voice, and we still have a lot of people going back to the, are there sightings? You know, is there Navy and military footage? Are there sightings? Are there sightings? You guys, I would put out a cautionary word to this community. Don't fall into that trap of, are there just, you know, sightings? Because it is so much bigger than that, obviously. But also, don't discount what the abductees have to say. There's a lot there that they have to offer. And, you know, and don't just fall into the trap about, are there sightings? There is, as we're talking about with this panel, there are crash retrievals, there's reverse engineering programs, there's legacy programs. There's a lot more to this subject, and it's going to take a lot of years of pulling that out to have any form of big disclosure.
And there's going to be a special guest on Melinda Leslie's tour tonight.
Yes.
Grant, you're crazy.
You guys, I cannot say who. Hopefully later I can go public, but I do
Eric,
have
you're going to be famous by next couple of days. Melinda, you're gonna be
it
famous.
was
And I can
announced
assure
here.
you, he and I will be talking about such things.
It was announced here, so if Melinda goes back and says
But,
who it is
you know,
afterwards.
and so you know.
And Melinda, you got to send him
Later, I
this
hope.
discussion afterwards.
Yeah. You know, I'll have a hidden
hey,
tape
guys.
recorder during my discussion.
I've got
No,
to
I'm
plug
just
my
kidding.
computer in. I'm going to lose my battery.
Yeah, I
Okay.
was doing that. I had to do that too.
Yeah.
I didn't
Yeah.
So, but I do want to say
mine
though
didn't come
that
unplugged too.
yeah, I do want to
But
say that
there's more to this. There's more history. I can tell you without a doubt that the working group guys know a lot more than they're saying. I go back. I had a whole friendship with others involved, not just Jack Houck, and the things that I learned from them over the years. There's so much more that they know. So definitely realize that, you know, that there's a lot more to this subject, and it's going to take everybody really pushing and digging. But we did, but don't lose sight of the fact too, we did make headway in the last 5 years.
Oh yeah.
We have Senate and Congress addressing this. That's huge. And I don't think it's done. I really don't. I mean, maybe
it's
I'm
not.
having wishful thinking, but I think those guys sounded really serious, and they're not going to just because the DOD's pushing back, that they're going to walk away that easily. I really don't think so.
Right.
I can add to that as I was in this since 1975, and I always tell the joke that probably Steve Bassett doesn't think is a joke, is he asked at one conference, he said, this is, I don't know, it was in early 2000s, and he said, so when do you think disclosure is going to take place? And all the speakers were on the panel, and they went 6 months, 1 year, and it came to me, and I went 2042, and Steve just looked at me like, how could you say that in front of this entire audience? And anyways, and I never believed it was ever going to happen. So when 2017 happened, even though I got warning beforehand from Chris Bledsoe, and I knew about Jim Semivan, and I knew they were going to drop this thing under Hillary and stuff like that, even then I still didn't believe it. And so when it happened, I was more shocked than anybody. I just could not believe it had actually happened. So now when people say, when do you think disclosure is going to happen? I say, I would not be surprised if it happens tomorrow morning, because I got absolutely, totally, I had no clue I was coming
Right.
the first time. And so,
Well, hey, you were
never know.
more right than most of the people on that panel. You were at least giving it about 20 years.
Yeah.
So that's not bad. I'm kind of with you on that one also. I had so many friendly arguments with Steve Bassett over a disclosure. I can't remember them all. And Steve is always, it's going to happen tomorrow. It's going to happen next week.
Yeah.
And I was always like, what drugs are you taking? I want those drugs. I want that optimism.
Yeah.
I never really believed it, but anyway.
Yeah. And I do know, the intention of people working in this issue, right? So the people that are pushing from transparency, the people from the working group, they're fully intending to roll out the crash retrieval conversation. Will they succeed? I mean, that's the holy
That's
grail.
the crash retrieval. That is the red line.
Yeah,
It is
The red line.
Yeah.
But, until you go over that one, the government or the secret keepers, they can play this little game of pretend like, well, there's something out there. We don't know what it is. And we can pretend that we just discovered this phenomenon from 2004 with the Tic Tac. We didn't know it was anything before that. They play this little game. But once you start acknowledging that we've recovered their technology, now you're into real conspiracy. And we are in an era
and
where
Richard, technology and bodies.
Yeah.
Absolutely, Melinda. Absolutely. So now you're into hardcore conspiracy. And just keep in mind, we now live in an era where you are not supposed to believe in conspiracies. Like literally, you're not. Conspiracy theories are trashed everywhere by the establishment. And what is a bigger conspiracy than what we're talking about? The UFO cover-up, alien technology and bodies. There's nothing bigger.
Yeah, and
And
that's
so
why
I have a very hard time believing that
Right.
the secret keepers are just going to walk away from the table and say, here's everything. I just
Rich,
I don't believe it.
I'm going to take a quote from you that I always love that you said this. It's impossible, but it's inevitable. Right.
Yes,
That's right.
So
I did say that.
a bunch. Yeah.
It is a
especially
paradox.
the old 2010 era.
Well, and
But
sightings
the-
are
but
on the
really,
increase.
Yeah, but the legacy programs are incredibly important because I got a quote from Hal. I said, Hal, give me a quote for just the what's a legacy program? And he said that the UAP legacy program is basically UAP studies going back decades. So it's not like, oh, we got a crash retrieval from 2010. Like
Right back.
legacy programs are important because they go back through history. So that we're talking Roswell or Trinity, or the Italian case now, which Lou was supportive, at least, of the evidence of that case, the 1933 Italian retrieval of an off-world vehicle where, the Americans.
I think that's a pretty good case. The more I look at that, Roberto Pinotti is the researcher who really
Right.
dug that out. And it does seem legit.
Lou was lending credence to it. And, allegedly the Americans seized it in 1945 and, towards the end of World War II when we got that, because allegedly the Germans had got it. And I mean, that would explain their interest and maybe headway in that topic. Although I don't think they got as far as a lot of people think they did. There is some kind of weird connection over there. between the Germans, the occult, and flying saucers, UFO technology. But then again, and the Americans allegedly got hold of it in 1945.
I believe the Italian case more than I believe in the German Black Forest case, supposedly in
Right.
1936.
Yeah.
Which I don't believe as much or at all. But I think the Italian case seems much more legitimate.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to mention here is the fact that part of this is up to us, and it's up to the pressure that have been put on and by the podcast world. I mean, the podcast world has sort of changed it, where people like Richard and I and Melinda sort of identified who the Avery people, watched these people, and people started to pay attention to Kit Green and Hal Puthoff, and then the Bigelow, that thing. And we put a lot of pressure on people to talk, where people are like, you're putting your podcast and Elizondo's on there, and these little things slip out, and more we're learning, because we know exactly where to push the buttons now, whereas before we really didn't know who was the covering up, who knew or whatever. But at least now we've got a podcast platform where we can use, and we know who the people are to keep sending letters into pressure.
This is why there's an inevitability. I said impossible, disclosure is impossible, but inevitable, and it's for reasons like this, because our society has changed so dramatically in the last couple of decades, where we have a community where we're able to talk like this and have conversations, and also bring in some of those much more powerful or important insiders as well. So yeah, there's definitely pressure coming up from below. That's what we sometimes forget. There is definite pressure coming from the people, that's us, that is helping to push this matter and keeping it out in the open. This didn't happen in the 1980s because it couldn't happen in the 1980s.
Yeah.
There wasn't the infrastructure in place like we have today.
And it's important that these people are cooperating. Listen, like, Gary Nolan gave me the story about the caudate putainment to publish, right? He let me and my friend Jay break that story, and he couldn't have done that, right? Like, obviously Kit had to say, go ahead, right? And then it goes through Gary, and then Gary allowed me to make the first public story on that. And again, Gary was at one of our events. I mean, he's out there talking about it, and here he wrote a paper for one of the committees that he spoke about how opening up this issue, at least at the very first from the inside, is a virtuous cycle of the potentials for technology and innovations, and people seem to like that idea. And again, he said, first it has to be a U.S. thing before it's a global thing. So why is this important for the U.S.? Well, if we can get ahead in technology, that'd be a great thing. So I think that people making those arguments, and again, ATIP wanted to include academics. They did not succeed, technically. But at the same time, Gary is like a proof of concept, where you have an academic who's kind of half in, half out. He's obviously, I mean, I don't know this. He didn't tell me this, but I would assume that he's been able to access sensitive information. But he's not overly crossing the line either, and he's able to help them. And Gary wants, and others are pushing for more academics to get involved, which from what I understand is currently underway. It's like, it's happening. To what extent, I'm not sure, but even if they're not giving classified information, more academics are coming on board and going to participate and give the subject more credibility.
Yeah. And the people that we've gotten out there now are lending credibility. But the New York Times did everything. That was the one day that changed the world in terms of these guys being able to come forward. And maybe they heard how much money that Tim Taylor made on his invention, and how many patents he and Gary Nolan have, and they suddenly realized, like, maybe there's some money in this, maybe there's some technology, and let's take a look at this thing. It's completely changed the world. That New York Times article, and it was the old deal, because I remember I wrote the article called "The 64 Reasons They've Decided Not to Tell You the Truth." And it was, the stock market's going to melt down, and people are going to jump off, bridges and stuff. And none of that happened. Absolutely nothing. It was sort of like people had gotten ready. They've been acclimatized, and everybody went, yeah, I know that already. Okay, now just tell me, where are they from? Where's the bodies? Is that true? And that's what I think part of this is, that people are getting acclimatized to this. And it really doesn't shock. There's not as many skeptics around anymore as there was in the days when I started, where you definitely kept your head down.
And, you
I
know,
was-
I just want to say very quick, and then Melinda, you can go. It's important to note that, you know, these people getting these patents and all this stuff that Timothy Taylor and Gary Nolan, you know, they were written about in American Cosmic, but they're both experiencers, you know.
Yeah.
And
Well,
they're both
I don't think people realize how many of them are experiencers. I mean, there's even a
Right.
reference that Hal Puthoff's is an experiencer, and his kid had this sighting in Phoenix just after the big sighting, and Jim Semivan. And you start
Eric
going
Davis.
through, and Eric Davis had the
Yeah.
sighting on the day that he graduated, and you start looking at this, and you go, you know, like, wow, maybe this is not, you know, coincidence where these guys are all, you know, having these connections to the field that they wanted to you know, work in this field, and that's all, the timing is just right, or whatever's going on. But
This
there's
is
a
what you
lot of
find
them
with
are
the general
experiencers.
public. So many more
Yeah.
people have had
Yeah, yeah.
experiences than you
That was
ever
my
hear
point.
about.
That was
exactly.
Richard, you just
Yeah.
making my point that I was about to bring up, which is, I think in some ways this has become the secret that they can no longer keep. And yes, we have this pushback, this infighting slowing down, but you guys, I also am quick to say, look, a couple of weeks or a couple of months of slowing down is not slowing down over 75 years. So when you go back to last five years, you go, well, there's been a constant and I don't see anything. Yeah, maybe tapered off a little, but it's still going up. And I think it became the secret they can no longer keep, because sightings are up to a huge degree. And the sharing of sighting information on social media is so big. I think it's become where it's becoming such common knowledge. I can tell you from people coming out on my tours every night, not only having sightings on my tours, but all these people opening up about their previous sightings. So sightings are extremely common. UFO sightings are extremely common. And so many people in power now have had them, as you guys were just saying. So I think that factors in to this in many ways being the secret they can no longer keep. Abductions are up, they're not going away, you know, and I'm realizing it's better for them. Someone made a decision somewhere along the way, like Richard, you were asking earlier, how high up? I don't know the answer to that, but someone has made a decision to say the timing is now. It's got to be the timing. And yeah, those that may be the gatekeepers or the secret maintainers are pushing back. So I think we're seeing that play out. And I just want to encourage everyone, keep at it, keep doing the work. It's not
Yeah.
going away. And
I'd like to add one thing.
Yeah.
I agree with everything you just said, Melinda. I think it's become very important to kind of break this subject open as quickly as we can, because however you look at it, I've been saying this now for a few years, but our world is in the midst of a global revolution. It's happening right now. It is happening all around us. You could say COVID really accelerated it. I think that's right, but it was even going on before that. We're looking at a global coordinated revolution to create a kind of new digital society. I will say a digital society of control, but also a society of a tremendous amount of information control. It's very obvious to me. And so, you know, the question of where does the UFO, we can call it disclosure, or UFO, the end of UFO secrecy, how does this fit into it? It doesn't seem like it's a coincidence to me that in the, let's say, 80 years that this phenomenon's been kind of in our consciousness, in our awareness, that we've been seeing a lot of these craft. Yes, I think there's been a longer visitation, but I personally believe that things change in the 20th century, and they change specifically because of our development as a society, as a civilization. Our technology got us to a level where we were getting attention now. And so I don't think it's an accident that we started receiving massive amounts of visitation at the time. Now we're looking in the 21st century that we're actually moving into a completely new phase of human existence, one that we've never had before. And I don't know if it's a good phase, by the way, but we're definitely seeing it. This is a very different kind of society that is being created worldwide, where we're turning ourselves into a society of much more like a hive mind, if you really think about it. 5G, 6G surveillance, 24/7 propaganda, believe this, believe that, believe this. It's like And if you have wrong think, boom, you're out. So you can see it happening. The culture's changing. The centralized control is happening. I'm going to tell you, we're becoming like them in a lot of ways. And I don't think that's a coincidence.
No.
So what I want to know is, what is the relationship between these other beings that have swarmed us and swarm us every single night? Every single night. There are black triangles over someone's house at 2:30 in the morning every single night, multiple times in this world. They're coming out of bodies of water. They're going into bodies of water. What the hell is that all about? What are they doing? And why are they interacting with us? And is it a coincidence that they're doing all of this while we're going through this massive transformation?
Right.
And disclosure matters for that, and among other reasons.
Well, there is a consciousness interaction. It's the consciousness of the planet. You know, Rich, I hear what you're saying, and I agree that there'll be those that try to use and control it. But don't just see the negative side of that. Yes, is there a possible negative? We have to be mindful of that and watchful of that and not allow that control to happen. Absolutely. But at the same time, I'm going to get real woo-woo on everyone here. Okay. It's the new age, you know, it is the age of Aquarius. It was supposed to be the age of technology. Well, it is, okay? We're also, though, changing in consciousness of the planet where there is less division between people. There is greater compassion and understanding in that less division, because there's more communication happening between different groups of people and different ideologies. And so is there kind of a melding together? Is there a possible negative spin, like you were just saying, Richard? Yes, but let's not forget the possible positive spin that is equally there.
We've ended the polarization in our world. I'm glad to know this.
No, not completely.
Not aware.
No, but we're going through a healing process. You, Richard, you know what I mean. You know what I mean. We're going through a healing process. Okay. Hang on. Let me make my point.
Sure.
We are expanding as a planet. And Grant, I know you probably agree with me here with this increased consciousness and awareness. Okay. That is going on. That is not to be forgotten. And so, yes, are we becoming more like them? But we're becoming more like them, and that people are becoming more psychic, more intuitive, you know, more expanded that way. This is increasing. And
at the same time that we move into a global totalitarian system, sure, okay. I guess it's a trade-off.
Okay, but I'm saying be aware of that.
Yeah.
And yes, do everything to stop it. But there are also positive things going on with this change and this shift in consciousness. And so there is that positive side, and people need to keep that in mind, that we're growing in those abilities, in that awareness, and that is happening too. The beings operate on consciousness. We know that. Grant writes books about it, okay? and James knows it. He's in CE5 and ICE groups that, you know, it's all about consciousness. That is demonstrated every night on my tours. I don't claim to do CE5, but we do it by osmosis, and you know, it ends up being that what we think has everything to do with the tours that night. When I have a group of clients who are really positive, we have amazing sightings, including structural craft. When I have anyone out there being negative, judgmental, it's not as good of a night, you know. And it happens so consistently. I've now done 1,590 as of tonight. Tonight is tour 1,590, and so I can say that I'm getting a good idea of the general populace idea on this, where their mind's at on it, and you have an increased awareness. As I started to say, my points that I was making was that it is becoming the secret they can no longer keep. I think that's part of why it's shifting, and it will play into the decisions. And Richard, even those concerns you have, this subject will play into that. You know, and all of us need to say so. And when I say all of us, I mean all of humankind, certainly everyone in ufology, because we can help direct that and hold people's feet to the fire, push for truth, for the knowledge, for, you know, as I started to say, there was infighting in the UFO field. I see so many people pushing back on the fact that it's ET. And people going, well, yeah, of course we hear that from the guys involved in this process. Like you were just saying, Linda Moulton Howe's, you know, interviewing these other guys, that you go, wait a second, these guys are even like, it's everyone's afraid to say it's ET. I'm sorry, I call bullshit, because I know that the working group guys know without a doubt it's ET. Now, they had those discussions with me themselves years ago. They know it is.
Well,
Okay. And so when
how-
they're dialing back on that, don't fall into it, everyone. We need to stick with this. It's about ETs. It's about consciousness as much as it's about the technology.
Right. And Hal wrote the paper called, you know, the ultra terrestrial hypothesis. So he's basically saying it's a non-human intelligence, possibly ET, possibly interdimensional, possibly all of the above. And again,
Right.
you know, some of what we're talking about here is like the cultural effects, or you know, similar to Vallée's the control hypothesis, you know, regarding, you know, the rollout of this, right? How much is the phenomenon guiding or influencing, or some people would use the term manipulating, kind of the rollout of disclosure and even human consciousness, right?
Sure.
In our development and our beliefs. So there's so much to unpack there, and I don't want to get too far into that, but
And without
you know,
a doubt, they could,
well, I want to
end it at any
I want to
point.
say, you know, because
If
I
they
want to
show
touch
up
on
in
both.
mass, that would end it right there.
Right, they could do that at any point in time,
And they
but
haven't.
you know, right, they have not. So
But they're coming more and more. So that's apparent. Sightings are going up.
until they do
Large
it,
group sightings are going up.
right. And you know, Richard has kind of, I don't want to say a negative spin on some of the things that are going on, but that's certainly
That's
one
putting
side
it
of
too mildly.
well, no, that's one side of the coin, and Melinda, what you're saying is the other side of the coin. And again,
I'm in the middle. I'm in the
right, and so am I, because I, you know, again,
let me quote John Lennon, because in the end, it's all consciousness. We are not the actor on the stage. We are playing an actor on the stage. And John Lennon said, in the end, it'll all be okay. If it's not okay, it's not the end.
right.
And
And
Melinda's got her special guest coming in 1 minute.
do you? Who's the guy? No, I'm kidding.
I can't say.
I know.
Can't say.
I know. But you know,
Hopefully I can later, but not.
I'm
We should maybe
optimistic.
shut her down for today.
Yeah, I'm optimistic, but at the same time, I've had the contact experiences where I was shown global things that are not good, right? So what's the intention, the motive behind during a contact experience I'm shown like an apocalypse, right? I don't know.
Okay, so can you give me a detail? Because I've never heard the story. Is it water related or is it nuclear related?
Nuclear.
'Cause I've heard both.
The one I had several that were nuclear.
Okay.
And again, I don't think I've actually publicly talked about that before, but you know, again, I came into this as an experiencer. I'm doing all this stuff that I'm doing now because I had contact experiences that affected me. Is that a type of guidance? Is that a type of manipulation?
That's a key question that people are ignoring, is the messages that the experiencers are getting. Why are experiencers getting these messages in terms of why they're being ignored? They're, you know, because you've got them and I've heard them. I mean, piles and piles of these stories.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I've grown more skeptical over the years since the experiences, in the sense that I'm more agnostic now to the interpretation, the meaning, and the motive behind them. Before, I took it, when I was younger, and even 10, 15 years ago, I took all this stuff very literally. Nowadays, you know, again, I've been practicing meditation for a long time.
But it's changed you. It's changed your attitude, and it's made you sort of more compassionate. It's like, what's her name? Susie Hansen tells a story about where I talk about the rapid image cycling, that they use this rapid image cycling thing, where she's shown where there's got 200 people in the studio, in the auditorium, and they show an image and an image and an image and image, and they go faster and faster. And then she says, and after a while, they're going more than 100 a second. And that's Bankston. That's Bankston's teaching about.
Right.
And then the being comes and he just puts his hand across like this, and everybody stops crying and all this wailing and crying, and people and it all the crying goes away, but the emotion stays with people. And it may be just that they're shifting emotion. They're changing in terms of you're a different person after those experiences. The same as when I had my psychedelic experience. I had 5 experiences that were literally hell. I mean, there's no other way to describe it. And it was going to last forever. And it was like nothing that you could ever describe. And I came out of it, and I tell you, I'm a different person after you have an experience like that. You can hear it. And experiencing it is a different thing.
And I had something that was akin to a near-death experience too. So, I mean, again, the odds that I had those kind of precognitive experiences that ended up in a daylight UFO sighting that was followed by me being called outside of my house and there's a craft there.
Yeah.
And somehow this near-death experience thing, the trauma-induced out-of-body experiences in the middle of it, I don't see how that's just by chance. It could be, but if it is, I guess it's lucky.
That's the big question I always ask. If you have the near-death experience, 37% of experiencers have had near-death experiences. And I say, what's the chance that you randomly had an abduction experience and randomly had a near-death experience? And 37% of people have got the same thing. You got to start looking at the patterns and say, maybe there's something here we should be looking at.
Yeah. But again, yeah, so that gets to kind of like, again, Richard's angle on it, which I think is very crucial. We have to keep that in mind. But at the same time, what Melinda was saying, I think we have to have that positive mindset as, you know, John Wheeler's participatory universe. I think that the consciousness influencing matter, which we know is, you know, happens, whether you're talking about placebo effect, where your thoughts literally affect the physical, process of your mind. Neuroplasticity, your thoughts are literally changing the your brain.
I teach psychokinesis classes all the
time.
And
I've done that actually. I've done the spoon
where people are demonstrating every time in my classes that their minds affect matter.
Right.
And everybody takes my class bends. And about 20% of those people do hands-off bending, where they're holding the silverware only from the base and the top manipulates or goes over.
Yeah. Well, I think you need a balance of these perspectives. You have to keep both in mind and kind of like,
But you create what you create what you believe. That's that John Mack quote where he talks to Ben.
Right. I know. I think so.
He says to Bud, it's just strange that I'm a psychiatrist and you're getting all the bad ones, and I'm the psychiatrist and I'm getting all the seeking ones. And he said, maybe, Bud, that has more to do with you and I and what's going on as to why we're getting these things.
Yeah, but I think what Richard is saying is crucial here, because you still have to work in both worlds. You can't just wish and dream everything away. It's not. I mean, but wish you got to realize
you're part of what you believe.
But but also your physical actions, your actions that you take physically, right, are also
influenced by beliefs. Totally,
it's part of that.
Look, none of my beliefs are going to change the fact that within another decade or so, we're all going to be living in a digital panopticon where you have no privacy for the rest of all time. Nothing's going to change that. That's happening.
That's not true, Richard. You can change it. And don't ever think in absolutes that way. Things can be changed. The will of the people and the mind of the people can absolutely change how things are going to turn out. And it's why it's important for people to be informed, to vote, to be educated, to share information. And because we do have the ability to change things.
Well, thank you for that belief. I don't agree with that belief. I would love for that to be true. I think there are far too many powerful forces at work in our world beyond nations. We're talking nations, corporations, private groups. It's happening. There's far too many reasons for it to happen, and it's not going to stop. So my only question is there a relationship that these ETs have toward that transformation?
That's
happening.
Yes. That's an excellent question. What is their role in this, and how do they want to affect us if they have a goal?
Do they support it? Do they oppose it?
Right.
Do they just not care?
Or are
they involved in it?
Oh no, they care. Go to all the
factions, right? Are there different intelligences that want one thing and different intelligences that want another?
Go to all the abduction accounts. The abductees who have deep recall of their experiences say these guys care in every way. They're constantly giving us warnings against nuclear energy, against destroying the environment, destroying the planet, about how we treat each other. They're extremely concerning. If you just go with all the abduction accounts and what's shared there are common threads in there.
Loose threads.
What?
I said
Loose threads. There's loose threads in the abduction research, without a doubt, saying that these beings care in every way, and they want us to wake the bleep up.
Right on.
Okay, so
Sure.
you know, we're basically at our time now, and you know, I mean, I could go with you guys forever, man. This is like awesome, really, and I'm super appreciative that all you guys came and joined for this conversation. And you know, we got to do this sometime again, but you know, just so everybody can go off and so Melinda can tell us who her secret guest is. No, let's just go around. We'll go counterclockwise. So we're going anti-gravity here.
And they just,
Counter-rotational
by the way, you
spin.
guys, they just texted me they're running late, so we're okay.
Who did?
My secret guest.
Who's your secret guest?
Yeah,
Okay.
texted me they're running late.
There you go.
Well, okay, so let's start with you. We're gonna go Grant, Richard, Melinda. Final words to the audience, parting words. I know we're gonna get a good balance here. So go ahead, start with you, Grant. You have any parting words for the audience? Anything? Yeah.
Okay, I don't think much is random in the world. I think reincarnation is a fact. We all came in here and we have to own up to the situations we're in. We can't be the victim, and that you got to remember in the end, it's all going to be okay. And so the only thing I say that's important is you have to realize you are not the actor on the stage. You are playing an actor on the stage. Because you were King Henry VIII in high school doesn't mean you're King Henry VIII. We're playing a role. So the idea is we come into the world and we are going to leave the world and we're going to get asked one question: how did it work out? Because we planned it. We can't blame our mother-in-law, the dog ate the homework, the government, whoever. It's all going to be up to us. So we got to only concern about one thing. We came into the world to do something, and we have to figure out what are we here to do and are we doing it? And that's why I say that I've always been so honored to be in this field. Like I could have been an untouchable in the streets of Calcutta and lived in a junkyard and spent my whole day looking for food, for something valuable enough to sell for food for tomorrow. I didn't. I got to play in the greatest Super Bowl story of all times. And I'm honored to be a part of this thing. And I think everybody should just think that, wow, we got to play. Most people don't even realize this game is playing. They don't even realize what's going on. They don't even realize there's a stadium. We're in the stadium. We may be the water boy, the quarterback or whatever, but we're in the stadium playing the biggest, most magnificent story of all times. And we should write down what we've got and be honored the fact that we got to be here.
Richard.
First of all, that was beautiful. And I agree with everything Grant just said there. I have a definite spiritual orientation in my life, which I've developed over the years. It's very strong with me. And it's the one thing that keeps me sane. Because when I look at how upside down our world actually is, if I didn't have that kind of orientation, I'd have lost it a long time ago. I actually agree with a lot of what Grant and Melinda say about consciousness, and it's important. And, you know, the need for us to continue to recognize the true essence of what we are, which we're beings that are greater than what we think we are. My wife, Tracy, says this all the time. I totally agree with it. It doesn't change the fact, though, that we are in the middle of a definite global revolution that is designed to create a totalitarianism. That's happening. And so, you know, that doesn't mean it's the end of all things. It just means that that's what we're moving into, and we need to wake up to that. I'm interested in understanding what is the relationship of these other beings to that transformation, as well as to the relationship of the human elites that are involved in making it happen, and where the UFO secrecy fits in all of it. And the last thing I'll just say is I've always believed that breaking the UFO secret, breaking the ET secret, is still one of our last best hopes for dealing with this new system that's coming on around us. In other words, a system of control. So by having a genuine, I don't even say disclosure anymore, let's call it exposure by those of us who are able to make it happen, to break open this stifling straitjacket of lies, that an enforced fiction that we're all basically made to live in. I think we need to have truth to shine on all of it. And I think if we were to get to a point where people were to realize, wow, this is real. I mean, we're kind of in that disclosure state now a little bit. Grant talked about 2017, the New York Times. Yes, but it's not a full disclosure. It's not an admission. It's not the president. It's not the government saying, yeah, as a matter of fact, the aliens are here. They haven't done that. In fact, they've gone very far from that. They're very, very far from that. So I think if we get to that point and we can break open the story of crash retrievals, which James, I know you wanted to cover more, we will, but crash retrievals are the red line. We break through that, we have a chance to expose a lot more, because people are going to start thinking, you lied about this for 80 whatever years. What else have you been lying about?
Yeah.
What else can we just open up? And I really feel we need to do that if we want a truly healthy global society.
That's right.
Out.
And Melinda?
I agree 100% with what both Grant and Richard have both expressed. And Richard, like you were just saying, we need the truth to be able to be a fully functioning global society that can make intelligent decisions on the future of the planet, on the future of all beings on the planet, and our relationship with anyone who may be out there off planet. So without that truth, we can't make good decisions. And I'm hoping Senate and Congress has, I'll go ahead and say, the balls to stick with this and push for it further. I hope certainly that those kind of somewhat appointed spokespeople in the field who are communicating with them, whether it be a Lou or Chris or Dan Sheehan or Jim or whatever, you know, that these folks continue to push it and don't let up. And we've made tremendous headway. I hope that that'll continue. I think everyone should realize I think Grant said earlier, we have our work to do. You know, we definitely have our work cut out for us to keep this ball rolling forward, and no one could be complacent. Also, don't fall into the traps of, you know, there's no ETs or it's only about sightings, because that could be part of the pushback crowd directing us away from the truth. And the truth is, we're not alone. And these beings may be much more advanced in consciousness than us. I think there's a lot of evidence suggesting that's likely. And we can learn and grow together as a human race and have an amazing future on this planet. And so, you know, and yes, address those concerns, Richard, that you bring up. You know, address those, not just roll over, but address them. But without the truth, we're left living lies, and the lies just keep getting worse, not getting better. So the truth has got to start somewhere. And I agree, Grant, for us to be here on this planet at this time, part of this subject, we're on the forefront of that change. The four of us on this panel very much are, very, very much are. And you know, we'll all write more books, you know, and do more to put more information out there. And so we are a part of this change, and I am so proud to be a part of this community.
And
especially with the people you get to meet with tonight.
Okay,
and there's some benefits in there.
Melinda, tell your special guest, tell your special guest that we all personally said hello, and thank you for their contributions to the field.
I certainly will.
All right, well, you know, thank you so much, guys, for doing this. We really got to do this again. This was awesome.
A lot of fun.
Yeah. And I really appreciate the kind of different perspectives. Like, we can have slightly different angles on it. And it's enriching to me. I think it's a great dialogue. And
hang on, I'll be right back. Hang on.
Okay.
We'll be gone by the time we get here.
We're not going to be here. Bye, Melinda.
We love you.
Bye, Melinda. Can I leave with a question? Not that I wanted answered, but it just occurred to me in the last couple of months. And that is, if we get full disclosure, will reptilians, grays, and mantids be allowed to emigrate and walk in the streets of America?
That's a great question. And kind of like just aside that I want, the Columns Elite, again, that's an informal name for an alleged group. Their belief was that if there was a disclosure, that we're basically inviting demonic forces into our world. And I think that's fascinating. And even though they're evangelical or Christian, fundamental religious in nature, that's a very occult idea, actually, that you're thinking about an intelligence and you're attracting it towards you. That's not actually very evangelical or Christian. If you think about it, that's an occult understanding.
But it's still a Christian belief. I mean, I even had the conversation with Art Bell, and we got into this sort of fight, and he said, I will shoot them as they come off the ship. That was Art Bell.
Wow.
So people have these beliefs about, and I live with people who, I mean, my first wife said, near the end of the marriage, she said, I believe it's demonic. And that's when I thought to myself, this is not good. Where am I going with this? How do you get out of this? It's like,
And I'm still trying to like reconcile or try to understand. It's like, why have I had like mostly positive experiences? I've had other experiences that were not so positive, but each experience had a different obviously it could all be the same intelligence acting as different players, so to speak, but I got a distinct different perception and vibe from some of the different interactions that where I would say, okay, that's not the same thing as what I had encountered in another.
I'll offer my opinion because people are different, but also these beings are different. I don't think that we're looking at one group. I think we have a whole neighborhood coming in.
I agree too. I agree with that.
There's too many specific stories with way many differences in detail that it just seems to me we've got the whole neighborhood here.
James,
they're not all of the higher consciousness that we like to think. Maybe some.
James, I think you need to come out. You need to come out of the closet because closets are for clothes.
I talk about a little here, a little there.
I'll have to interview you. Can I interview you?
You can.
Let's get this out.
Yeah, you could do that.
I would love that because you've got stories that I think that match up with some of the stuff I've heard and be interesting. Okay, that's all I've got to say. I'm leaving.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, wait, Melinda, did you have anything else, or we're going to close it down here?
I don't know what I missed right there. Sorry. I heard commotion outside, and I had to know if it was that. But not here yet.
Special guest.
The limo's pulled up.
Not here yet. And for everyone out there, I wanted them to come on, but they had texted me that they were not willing to do that, unfortunately. So
all right.
We still got a story out of it, though. We still got a story.
Yeah. And there'll be more story. There'll be more afterwards because.
Okay.
And if he wants to do a debut on engaging the phenomenon, I'd totally be down for that.
As I just will say, as someone who's an abductee, I've had a variety of experiences. Certainly, most of my ET ones have been positive and or a choice to view them in a positive light. The only ones that were really rough were the covert ones, which could get pretty rough. But those guys are just they're just trying to learn, like had been said in the threads piece, loose threads. It had been said that these guys, the working group guys and everybody were just saying that people wanted to know, you had to get close to us to get close to understanding the beings. Yeah. And I think that's why there's that covert involvement and always has been, because they know that they got to get close to us to get covert
human
involvement, right. Because they have to get close to us, like it had said in there. And there was even more that Omega said they were going to have in there. And I'm going to encourage them to go that direction, maybe in a follow-up article, and see if I can help them with it. But I suggest that they do that, because there is a lot to be said there and a lot more that can be known.
Yeah,
okay, I got to leave. So say hi to Brock and we'll talk to you later.
Later, Grant. Hey, before you cut this off, James.
Yeah.
Very funny, Grant.
I would just say that loose threads document, at the very beginning of this, you were asking me to encapsulate it, but I was thinking, there was quite a bit more. Melinda brought up the whole biological testing element, basically, apparently, seemingly spearheaded by Kit Green in the early days, which has now become this amazing study that Kit Green and Gary Nolan, and I'm sure others are involved in, essentially checking the genetics of experiencers. That's really, I think, what it comes down to. And that's absolutely fascinating. And they talk about that there. And then the other thing that I just wanted to mention for someone who, because everyone should read this document, they talk about directed energy weapons.
Yes.
And the whole plan, I don't know, to take down UFOs using directed energy weapons. And they cited Virginia and Peru 1997 as examples. I thought it was very interesting.
Right.
And then the whole idea about tracking and baiting UFOs, basically drawing them in and using various technologies to find them.
Yeah.
Very
And the funny thing about that too is that, you know, and even in the 1990s, Stephen Greer was saying he had an insider talking about neutrinos and neutrino detectors.
Right. They were talking about anti-neutrino something.
Yeah.
I mean, there's all
Right.
but
So
that's in Loose Threads.
and so that came forward
Yeah.
in the conversation nowadays. And on top of that, I
Okay,
remember
guys, I'm so sorry. Apparently my guests are here and
and they don't want to say hello.
Well, I'll ask one more time, but I don't think so.
Ask one more time. But so Rich, and the
Yeah.
funny thing is, I remember hearing Greer talk about that, and in some science article years after he was talking about it, it said, "Oh, neutrinos could possibly travel faster than light," and that would make sense, right? That we're talking then faster than light or some kind of advanced energy technology. And this guy, I forget, I think he said the guy was from the NRO that had developed the patent.
They can pass through barriers that almost nothing else can pass through.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. So maybe
there's that. And I don't know about the speed, but that would be interesting.
Right. So, I mean, again, just that those kind of things came afterwards is interesting to me.
Yeah.
And again, I'm gonna link Loose Threads in the description for everybody to read. It's a masterpiece. And I think they're gonna continue to update it a little here and there.
They should. I think they should publish it as a book.
They should.
I was saying this to Omega privately, I think, and it's very well written. It's a good read.
Yeah.
Aside from being really well researched.
Yeah.
It's not a bad read at all.
My special guest says hello and that he absolutely loves you guys.
Really?
We love him right back. All right.
All right, you guys. On that note, I should get going.
All right.
So
It's
thanks.
been great. We'll all talk again
Sorry,
soon.
James, for the interruptions. I greatly apologize, but
Hey,
it was a unique situation going on my
Very,
end.
Good seeing you, Melinda.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. Thank you.
All right. Take care,
And
guys.
thank you, James, for having me on. I really
Of
appreciate it.
course. And good luck tonight.
Thank you. I will. I'll have feedback for everybody, I'm sure.
Yes.
All right.
All right.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Oh my goodness, I adore her. She is so good. Well, are we